Chapter 1243. Xiaochen guessed that Feng Zhu and Long Yang were both holy princes. However, there was one thing that he didn't expect, and that was their rankings on the holy rankings. Feng Zhu was ranked 6th on the holy rankings, while Long Yang, who usually looked extremely wretched, was actually ranked 3rd on the holy rankings. Although there was only a difference of 3 places between 3rd and 6th, the gap between them wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. As mentioned before, once one was ranked in the top 3, they were on a completely different level. Who would have thought that a wretched person with no bottom line would actually be one of the top 3 on the holy rankings? Xiaochen didn't know much about the holy rankings. What he knew was all from Chenling. Therefore, Xiaochen naturally couldn't guess Long Yang's and Feng Zhu's exact rankings on the holy rankings. While Xiaochen was secretly shocked by Long Yang's and Feng Zhu's strength, Long Yang, who had defeated Feng Zhu's attack with a single blow, didn't attack again. Instead, he said helplessly, "I say, Feng Zhu, what do you mean by this? The two of us are simply, I don't want to listen, brother Long Yang. That's not what you said when we were young. Back then, you said that you would marry me when we grew up." Long Yang wanted to persuade Feng Zhu, but before he could finish, Feng Zhu interrupted him. As he spoke, tears welled up in his eyes and his voice became choked with sobs. In fact, Long Yang and Feng Zhu were indeed childhood sweethearts, which was also the reason why Feng Zhu was so stubborn. The Dragon Clan and the Feng Huangyi clan had been friends for generations, and the descendants of the two clans were familiar with each other. This was the case for Long Yang and Feng Zhu. Both of them were the most talented people in their respective clans. Since young, they had displayed cultivation talent and bloodline power that others of the same generation couldn't match. It was also because they were destined to be outstanding talents from the moment they were born that Feng Zhu and Long Yang actually had a competitive relationship from the start. Of course, most of the time, it was Feng Zhu who wanted to surpass Long Yang. After all, with Long Yang's temperament, he obviously wouldn't care about these things. Since young, Feng Zhu had regarded Long Yang as his target to surpass. Unfortunately, even though Feng Zhu's talent was heaven-defying, he was still lacking a little bit compared to Long Yang. And it was this little bit of difference that made Feng Zhu unable to surpass Long Yang no matter how hard he tried. In the beginning, Feng Zhu would challenge Long Yang every year. But every time, Long Yang would win. Feng Zhu had never been able to defeat Long Yang. It was under such a premise that Feng Zhu developed a different kind of feelings for Long Yang over time. It was normal for a beauty to love a hero. Especially for a woman like Feng Zhu, who was born extraordinary and had outstanding talent, the husband she imagined was naturally an indomitable expert. However, among the beasts of the same generation, only Long Yang met Feng Zhu's requirements. In addition, the two of them were innocent when they were young and often spent time together. Moreover, Feng Zhu was a beauty that could topple countries, so Long Yang naturally said some words of love to her. Perhaps these words were just ignorant jokes to Long Yang, but Feng Zhu firmly remembered them in her heart. Later, the two of them reached the age to talk about marriage. The experts of the Dragon Clan and the Phoenix Huangyi clan had a discussion and felt that the two of them were very compatible. So, they held an engagement ceremony for the two of them. It was supposed to be a very smooth thing because Feng Zhu wouldn't refuse this marriage at all. But no one thought that Long Yang would actually run away from the marriage, which caused the situation to become like this. Of course, a large part of the reason why the Dragon Clan and the Phoenix Huangyi clan agreed to let Long Yang and Feng Zhu get married was probably because of benefits. Because once the two of them got married, it meant that the relationship between the Dragon Clan and the Phoenix Huangyi clan would be closer. At that time, the two clans could also be closer together and advance and retreat together. When he was young, Long Yang did say that he would marry Feng Zhu when he grew up, but at that time, he was just teasing this little girl. Who would have thought that this little girl would take it seriously? At this time, hearing Feng Zhu's words, Long Yang was a little stunned, especially when he saw Feng Zhu's tear-stained face. Long Yang's heart softened and he didn't know what to say. However, it was impossible for Long Yang to agree to marry Feng Zhu now. It wasn't because Long Yang hated Feng Zhu, but because Long Yang really didn't plan to get married. In Long Yang's heart, his feelings for Feng Ju were very complicated. If it was to say that he liked her, then there was definitely a little, but obviously it wasn't to the level of a lifetime. In addition, in Long Yang's opinion, marriage meant responsibility. A person would have more freedom, so Long Yang really didn't want to get married so early. Feng Ju changed from her previous cold anger to a tear-stained face. This made Long Yang a little overwhelmed. In the midst of helplessness, Long Yang turned his head to look at Xiao Chen. There was a touch of a demanding look in his eyes. Obviously, he wanted Xiao Chen to help him think of a way. However, in the face of Long Yang's request, Xiao Chen chuckled softly and said, "Brother Long Yang, how can you ask me about this matter? I can't help much. You are the expert in this aspect. Aren't you called the little white dragon of the waves?" Xiao Chen had roughly guessed the whole story, so he began to tease Long Yang. After all, Feng Ju was definitely not an enemy, and after a short contact, Xiao Chen was sure that Feng Ju really liked Long Yang. Originally, Long Yang wanted to ask Xiao Chen for help. However, after hearing his words, Long Yang almost vomited blood. Bad friend, this is definitely a bad friend. Long Yang was gloating. However, there was no other way. Long Yang went to Xiao Chen with a pleading face and pleaded bitterly, "Brother Xiao, I'm different. I'm just acting. I don't play with feelings. You and sister-in-law have such a good relationship. You must have a way, right? It's not that there is no way." Hearing this, Xiao Chen was silent for a moment, then whispered. Hearing this, Long Yang was delighted and immediately said to Xiao Chen, "That's great. Thank you very much, Brother Xiao." Sigh, don't be in such a hurry. There is a way, but there is no guarantee that it will succeed. Also, since I helped you, shouldn't Brother Long repay me a little? Xiao Chen smiled. Sure. As long as Brother Xiao helps me settle this matter, I will agree to any conditions. Xiao Chen had a request, but Long Yang agreed to it without hesitation. He agreed very readily. Seeing this, Xiao Chen did not keep him in suspense and said softly, "Don't worry, my request is very simple. Brother Long, you just need to tell me about the Holy Ranking Board. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1244. After personally witnessing Long Yang and Feng Ju's strength, Xiao Chen was even more curious about the saint ranking. He really wanted to know if the saints on the saint ranking were all monsters. Xiao Chen dared not say anything else, but there was one thing that Xiao Chen was sure of. When they fought just now, Long Yang and Feng Ju definitely did not use their full strength. Even so, Xiao Chen already felt a great amount of pressure. It was hard to imagine how strong Long Yang and Feng Ju would be if they went all out. Moreover, Long Yang and Feng Ju were people of the same generation. They were not much older than him. Because he had witnessed their strength, Xiao Chen was even more curious about the saint ranking. Moreover, the method that Xiao Chen mentioned was actually not much of a method. In any case, it would definitely not solve this matter. It would only slightly ease the relationship between Long Yang and Feng Ju. Xiao Chen had never thought of solving this matter perfectly because he could see that whether it was Long Yang or Feng Ju, they were both very stubborn people. Once they had decided on something, they would not change their minds. Therefore, whether it was to persuade Long Yang to marry Feng Ju or to persuade Feng Ju to give up on Long Yang, it was impossible. As such, Xiao Chen's method was just a delaying tactic. He also told Long Yang about this matter. However, Long Yang did not even think about it and nodded repeatedly in agreement. Okay. We will do as Brother Xiao says. As long as we can settle this little princess, we will do anything. Long Yang knew Feng Ju's character very well. Therefore, he did not expect Xiao Chen to persuade Feng Ju to give up in one go. After receiving Long Yang's reply, Xiao Chen nodded slightly and said, "Okay, I will give it a try." After saying that, Xiao Chen walked towards Feng Ju alone. During this time, Tianyu was a little worried and wanted to follow beside Xiao Chen. However, she was stopped by Xiaochen, indicating that Tianyu was fine. Xiaochen walked all the way until he was 5 steps away from Fengju. With regards to Xiaochen, Fengju had clearly seen through his identity as a human. His attitude was somewhat cold as he said, "Scram." However, Xiaochen didn't care about it at all. He simply said, "I came here because of your relationship with Brother Longyang. But since you don't want to listen, then forget it. You two can fight among yourselves." With regards to Fengju, Xiaochen didn't have the slightest intention of spoiling him. After speaking, without waiting for Fengju's reply, Xiaochen directly turned around and was about to leave. However, at this time, Fengju's expression changed slightly, and he opened his mouth to call out to Xiaochen. Wait a minute, Fengju took the initiative to call out to Xiaochen. Hearing this, Xiaochen turned around and smiled. "What, Princess Fengju is willing to listen? I'm warning you, you better say something. If not, I will personally kill you today." Although he was very curious about what Xiaochen wanted to say, Fengju still opened his mouth to threaten him. Originally, Fengju had a fiery temper. In addition, Xiaochen was on the same side as Brother Longyang, so Xiaochen understood Fengju's attitude towards him. Xiaochen said with a smile, "Princess, it's not too late to listen to what I have to say. I know it's impossible to persuade you and Brother Longyang to take a step back, and I can also see that Brother Longyang doesn't hate Princess. It's just that Brother Longyang hasn't considered marriage yet. Since Brother Longyang is now so resistant to marriage, why does Princess still want to force him? If Princess can change your method, I think it's not impossible for Brother Longyang to take the initiative to propose marriage to Huang Yi in the future." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Fengju couldn't help but ask anxiously, "If you want to do this, quickly say it." Obviously, Fengju's interest was piqued by Xiaochen's words. Hearing this, Xiaochen didn't keep him in suspense and continued to speak unhurriedly. "Princess, in fact, the more you force a man, the more he will resist. In that case, why don't Princess try to make a change? Since Brother Longyang doesn't want to get married now, Princess can stay by his side. I don't think Brother Longyang will chase you away, right? After being together for a long time, Brother Longyang will be used to having Princess by his side. At that time, wouldn't everything fall into place?" Hearing Xiaochen's words, Princess Fengju's eyes became brighter and brighter. In the end, she couldn't help but clap her hands and cheer. "Good idea, why didn't this princess think of it? Human, you really have a way. Good, this princess will remember this. If there's anything in the future, you can tell this princess. This princess will protect you." As she spoke, Princess Fengju didn't forget to pat Xiaochen's shoulder happily. In this regard, Xiaochen could only smile bitterly. This little princess of the Feng Huangyi clan looked cold and unapproachable, but he didn't expect her to have a lively personality. Daring to love, daring to hate, and doing things decisively. This was Xiaochen's initial evaluation of Princess Fengju. Although Princess Fengju's personality was definitely not good, and was even a little unruly, such a woman was indeed difficult to hate. He had successfully convinced Princess Fengju. Not far away, Longyang was so shocked that his jaw almost dropped when he saw Princess Fengju, who had a cold look on her face before, patting Xiaochen on the shoulder and saying something with a smile on her face. This Xiaochen was godly. How long had it been? Just a few words, and Princess Fengju's tears had turned into a smile? And looking at Princess Fengju's expression, it was obvious that she admired Xiaochen a lot. I miscalculated. Looks like Brother Xiao is the real veteran in the field of flowers." Longyang couldn't help but sigh softly. Although Longyang's words were soft, Tianyu, who was standing beside him, heard every single word. In this regard, Tianyu's face turned cold and asked Longyang, "Young Master Longyang, what did you say just now? I didn't hear it clearly, can you say it again?" Obviously, in his excitement, Longyang forgot that Tianyu was standing beside him. At this time, hearing Tianyu's words, Longyang smiled embarrassedly. Nothing. This young master is just saying that Brother Xiao has good methods, really good methods. Long Yang thought that Xiaochen had settled Princess Fengju, but at this time, Xiaochen was in a headache. That's right, Xiaochen did persuade Princess Fengju, but Princess Fengju's next decision made Xiaochen a little helpless for a moment. Princess Fengju said with a determined face. Let's do it this way. From now on, I will follow Long Yang. Wherever he goes, I will follow. Xiaochen was taken aback when he heard Princess Fengju's words. Then, he said helplessly, Princess, I don't think it's the right time yet. Brother Long Yang and I are going to the human domain. Princess, why don't you wait for Brother Long Yang to come back before you, seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation? Chapter 1245. Initially, Xiaochen wanted to persuade Princess Fengju to leave first. Who knew that Princess Fengju would want to follow the three of them to the human territory? Hearing this, Xiaochen was completely helpless. Previously, when Long Yang went to the human territory, Xiaochen was a little worried about his safety. Now that Fengju was involved, wouldn't it be more troublesome? However, in the face of Xiaochen's persuasion, Fengju acted like Long Yang and didn't care at all. Waving his hand casually, Fengju said nonchalantly, "Don't worry, there is no place in the central world that I can't go." Even his words were exactly the same. Hearing Fengju's words, Xiaochen didn't know what to say. Moreover, from the looks of it, it would be difficult to change Fengju's mind. Hinting at Xiaochen not to worry, Fengju turned around and shouted to the 12 girls from the Huani clan. "All of you can go back. You don't have to follow me." These 12 girls were also from the Huani clan and could be considered as Fengju's personal guards. They had always been responsible for Fengju's safety. Hearing that Fengju wanted all of them to leave, one of the girls said reluctantly, "Princess, originally, she wanted to persuade Fengju to let them follow, but before she could finish her sentence, Fengju waved his hand and said, 'It's fine, you don't have to worry about my safety. Besides, it will be inconvenient for all of you to follow me to the human territory. Go back.'" Fengju insisted. Seeing this, the 12 girls couldn't say anything more. They immediately bowed to Fengju and left quickly. Not far away, seeing that the 12 girls left and only Fengju stayed behind, Long Yang's eyes flashed with a trace of doubt. What was the meaning of this? Everyone left, but only Fengju stayed behind? But before Long Yang could ask, Xiaochen had already brought Fengju to him. Looking at Long Yang, Xiaochen revealed a somewhat helpless smile. "That? Brother Long Yang, Princess Fengju also intends to go to the human territory with us." "What?" Hearing Xiaochen's words, Long Yang was stunned. Then, he said in disbelief. However, before Xiaochen could reply, Fengju had already come to Long Yang's side. Without any explanation, Fengju hooked Long Yang's arm and said with a sweet smile, "Brother Long Yang, don't worry, I won't force you anymore. I will stay by your side. When you want to marry me one day, it won't be too late for us to get married." "What?" Hearing Fengju's words, Long Yang was stunned on the spot. What was going on? Was this the result of asking Xiaochen to persuade Fengju? Although Fengju was no longer forcing him, was he going to rely on him? Did he kill someone with a soft knife? From Fengju's words, it was not hard to tell that from today onwards, Fengju would definitely stay by Long Yang's side. Regarding this, Long Yang looked at Xiaochen with a puzzled expression. The meaning in his eyes was very obvious. "What did you say to her?" Facing Long Yang's gaze, Xiaochen spread his hands helplessly and made an "I can't do anything about it" expression. There was no room for Long Yang to refuse at all. Princess Fengju insisted on staying. After that, the four of them found an inn in the city to stay. They still planned to leave for the human territory tomorrow morning. At night, the four of them casually chatted and drank in the inn. However, looking at Long Yang's appearance, he was like a little wife who had been bullied. On the other hand, Fengju and Tianyu quickly became familiar with each other after a short period of contact. Making friends between women was completely different from making friends with men. If men wanted to get familiar with each other, they would have to experience a lot of things in the end. However, it was different for women. Once they met, they would become friends with each other in the blink of an eye without even exchanging a few words. Looking at Tianyu and Fengju who were whispering not far away, Xiao Chen and Long Yang sighed helplessly. They raised their cups and drank. Then, Xiao Chen asked Long Yang. "Brother Long Yang, tell me about the saint ranking." Xiao Chen was indeed very curious about the saint ranking. Hearing this, although Long Yang was depressed, he did not refuse. After all, he had nothing to do now. Long Yang poured himself and Xiao Chen a cup of wine and said slowly. The saint ranking is actually not complicated. To put it simply, the saint ranking of the central world can be said to be a method by the will of the heavenly way to protect the younger generation. As the third holy son on the saint ranking, Long Yang's understanding of the saint ranking obviously surpassed Xiao Chen's elder brother, Chen Ling. With Long Yang's explanation, Xiao Chen quickly gained a more detailed understanding of the saint ranking. He already knew that the saint ranking was set up by the will of the heavenly way. Currently, there were a total of 108 people on the saint ranking. Whenever there was a change in the saint ranking would appear in the sky above the central world. No matter where one was, one could see the saint ranking. There were a total of 108 names on the saint ranking. As long as one was on the saint ranking, it represented an honor. At the same time, it was also a form of protection from the will of the heavenly way. According to Long Yang, unless the holy sons and holy daughters on the saint ranking were killed in battle or by others of the same generation, no one was allowed to kill the holy sons and holy daughters on the saint ranking. This included the great sage. To put it simply, if one was much older than a holy son on the saint ranking and had a higher seniority than a holy son on the saint ranking, one could not attack the holy sons and holy daughters on the saint ranking. Otherwise, one would be punished by the will of the heavenly way. Such a punishment was extremely severe. Previously, the great sage did not believe in heresy and killed a holy son on the saint ranking. That holy son was only ranked 105th on the saint ranking. However, even so, the great sage was still killed by the will of the heavenly way. It could be said that the holy sons on the saint ranking were a group of people protected by the will of the heavenly way. This was also the reason why Long Yang and Fengju did not mind going to the human domain at all. Naturally, Long Yang and Fengju were not afraid of people of the same generation. This was because there were very few people in the same generation who could match the two of them, let alone have the ability to kill them. Unless several holy sons in the top 10 on the saint ranking attacked together, it would be possible to pose a threat to the two of them. Of course, the will of the heavenly way's protection for the holy sons on the saint ranking was only one of the reasons. There were many more things that even Long Yang did not understand. For example, it was said that every generation of holy sons on the saint ranking would eventually go to a mysterious place. In this mysterious place, the holy sons on the saint ranking would die on a large scale. However, those who were able to come out alive in the end would all become the great sage without exception. There were even rumors that some had broken through the great sage realm and mysteriously disappeared. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1246. After learning more about the holy ranking from Long Yang, Xiao Chen felt a sense of yearning towards the chosen on the holy ranking. Putting everything else aside, just the fact that he was protected by the will of the heavenly Tao was already heaven-defying enough. The chosen on the holy ranking could only fight against people of the same generation. Experts of the older generation could not fight against the chosen on the holy ranking. Moreover, this was the rule of the will of the heavenly way. There was no need to think about hiding anything from the will of the heavenly way. Unlike living beings, did the will of the heavenly way have a life? It did not seem to have a physical existence. However, such a mysterious existence controlled everything in this world. Or rather, it coexisted with this world. Therefore, in this world, there was no need to think about hiding anything from the will of the heavenly way. It was also because of this that no one dared to violate the rules of the holy ranking. After all, the great sage had used his life to prove this point. The will of the heavenly way in this world coexisted. Neither of them could leave the other. If the will of the heavenly way disappeared, this world would not be far from destruction. At the very least, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth would quickly dry up and no one would be able to set foot on the martial way. After learning the answer from Long Yang, Xiaochen was no longer worried about Long Yang and Feng Zhu going to the human race's territory. After all, with the rules of the holy ranking, the experts of the older generation of the human race would not dare to make a move. As for the younger generation, no one in the human race was a match for Long Yang. After chatting casually in the inn for a while, the four of them returned to their rooms one after another. Xiaochen naturally shared a room with Tianyu. Long Yang originally intended to have a room for himself, but Feng Zhu refused to comply. In the end, Long Yang and Feng Zhu also booked a room. After Xiaochen's persuasion, Feng Zhu seemed to have thought it through. He treated Long Yang with extreme gentleness. However, Long Yang couldn't adapt to such gentleness. It was simply torture for him. However, Feng Zhu's method was perfect. At least Long Yang didn't have any way to break it. He couldn't just beat Feng Zhu away. They did not bother about Long Yang and Feng Zhu. After a night of cultivation, the four of them woke up early the next morning. After washing up, they left Delight City and headed for the human race's territory. Because Delight City was already at the border of the human territory and there was no teleportation formation that led to the human territory, Xiao Chen's group of four could only rely on flying to travel. However, the four of them were not in a hurry. They would be able to reach the human territory in less than a day. Along the way, they didn't rest much. In the afternoon, Xiao Chen's group of four arrived at a wide river. According to Long Yang, this river was the dividing line between the beast race and the human territory. It was called the Heavenly Qin River. The Heavenly Qin River cut across the entire border between the human and beast races. The human and beast races' territories were also divided by the Heavenly Qin River. The southern bank was the beast ancestors' territory, while the northern bank was the human territory. On the Heavenly Qin River, there were many experts from both races guarding it. They formed many strongholds, and when these strongholds were connected together, they formed a solid line of defense. It could be said that both the human and beast races had set up a heavy defense on both sides of the Heavenly Qin River. The three main races of the beast race and the human race had sent many experts to guard the area. Of course, compared to the human and ghost races' territories, the two sides of the Heavenly Qin River were relatively peaceful. After all, the relationship between the human and beast races was not as tense as the ghost race. The border between the ghost race and the human race had gathered many of the top battle prowess from both races. The defensive force there was at least 5 times that of the Heavenly Qin River. The human race and ghost race could go to war at any time, especially now that the War of the 100 Races was approaching. As a result, the relationship between the two races became even more tense. As for the beast race and the human race, they were mostly on guard. As a result, the Heavenly Qin River was relatively peaceful. They came to a crossing on the Heavenly Qin River. There were many such crossings on the Heavenly Qin River, and they were there for the convenience of travel between the two races. Of course, passing through the crossings was not something that could be agreed upon. This was because regardless of whether one was from the human race to the beast race or vice versa, they had to go through the checks of both races. Only after going through the checks could they successfully enter one of the territories. Xiaochen and the other three naturally had to go through the checks of the beast race. However, due to the presence of Long Yang and Feng Zhu, the experts of the beast race did not dare to make things difficult for them and directly chose to let them pass. On the entire Heavenly Qin River, almost 80% of the places were set up with forbidden flight formations. Therefore, if one wanted to rely on strength to cross the Heavenly Qin River, one would either have to find those extremely dangerous places, but the danger was too high, or have the strength of the quasi-saint realm and forcefully break through the forbidden flight formations to cross. However, these two methods were not the best choice. The best choice was naturally to find a crossing. Every few hundred miles, there would be a ferry. However, the only problem with crossing the river through the ferry was that they would have to be interrogated by the two clans. Speaking of the Heavenly Chen River's crossings, it was actually very simple. There were no boats or bridges. To put it bluntly, it was an area between flight-prohibiting formations. Hence, it was called a crossing. As there were no flight-prohibiting formations here, cultivators could naturally fly across without any worries. However, there were strongholds of the two races on both sides of the river. One was for defense, and the other was for checking those who crossed the river. After successfully passing through the checks of the beast race, the expert of the beast race in charge of this stronghold personally escorted the group to the riverside after learning of Long Yang and Feng Ju's identity. The expert of the beast race reminded Long Yang and Feng Ju with a fawning smile on his face as he looked at them. Young Master Long Yang, Princess Feng Ju, the defenses on the other side of the river have just changed 2 days ago. It is said that the person in charge of this stronghold is an elder of the Heavenly Yin Sun sect. This person doesn't seem to have a good impression of the beast race. Young Master and Princess should be more careful. The expert of the beast race took the initiative to remind them. Hearing this, Long Yang smiled slightly and said, "It's fine. Brother Xiaochen will take care of the human race. Isn't that right, Brother Xiaochen? It's your territory now. You have to protect us." Long Yang was clearly joking. However, hearing this, Xiaochen still rolled his eyes and said in annoyance, "Forget it. I can't even protect myself when crossing the river. You know that I'm not from the central world. I don't have an illustrious identity like yours. So if you want me to protect you, forget it. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1247. Unlike Long Yang and Feng Ju, Xiaochen wasn't born and raised in the central world. He didn't have any roots in the central world, let alone any backing. Moreover, although the Sacred Palace was undoubtedly one of the strongest forces in the North Star world, a quasi-saint sect like the Sacred Palace didn't have any right to speak in the central world. It was the Supreme Saint sects that truly dominated the central world. Therefore, Xiaochen could be said to be an ordinary person with no background in the central world. However, Long Yang didn't seem to mind Xiaochen's words at all. He smiled and said, "Brother Xiaochen, don't belittle yourself. With your talent, you'll soon be able to gain a foothold in the central world." Ha! Long Yang didn't really need Xiaochen to do anything. After all, he knew that Xiaochen hadn't really adapted to the central world yet. Moreover, this was Xiaochen's first time in the human territory. The four of them rose into the air and flew across the Heavenly Chen River along the ferry route. Soon, the four of them arrived on the other side of the Heavenly Chen River, where the human territory was. There was also a stronghold here, but it belonged to the human race. However, the four of them were surrounded by several human race experts as soon as they landed. The leading saint expert looked at the four of them and said after sizing them up, "A human race, a heavenly race, and 2 beast race experts? What do you want to do in the human territory?" Xiaochen and the other 3 didn't try to hide their identities, so the saint expert could see through them. Long Yang took the initiative to answer the question. "Can't we come to the human territory for a stroll?" Long Yang slowly extended his right hand as he spoke, and an ethereal token floated above his palm. The token didn't have a physical body, but one could see a heavenly lightning pattern on it and the number 3 on the back. The saint was stunned when he saw the token. Then, he asked in a deep voice, "You are Long Yang?" He had recognized Long Yang's identity with just a token. The token that Long Yang had displayed earlier was actually a token unique to the chosen on the saint rankings. The 108 holy sons and holy daughters on the holy rankings all had such a token. Once one stepped onto the holy rankings, the heavenly way would bestow a token. As long as one's will moved, the token would appear out of thin air. Furthermore, the holy rankings token could not be duplicated, nor could it be manufactured, because the token did not have a physical body. There was no need to doubt the authenticity of the token of a chosen on the saint rankings because it couldn't be fake. Long Yang nodded faintly in response to the saint's question. "Yes." Long Yang took out his token, and Feng Ju did the same. Feng Ju took out her token, which was exactly the same as Long Yang's. However, Feng Ju's token had the number 6, which meant that she was ranked 6th on the saint ranking. 2 chosen on the holy rankings, and both of them were ranked in the top 10. After seeing Long Yang and Feng Ju's tokens, the saint didn't say anything else. Clearly, he planned to let them pass. Due to the existence of the Heavenly Way and the uniqueness of the holy rankings, there was an unwritten rule among the 100 clans of the Central World that the entry of chosen on the holy rankings could not be stopped. Naturally, the human race also abided by this rule. When he saw the saint immediately choose to let them pass, he shifted his attention to Xiaochen and Tianyu. At this moment, Xiaochen coveted the chosen on the holy rankings even more. It really wasn't bad to have such an identity. Not only could he obtain the protection of the Heavenly Way, but he could also come and go as he pleased in the Central World. Moreover, he didn't have to worry about his identity being exposed at all. However, it was still slightly difficult for Xiaochen to ascend the hallowed rankings with his current strength. According to Long Yang, even the person at the bottom of the 108 people on the hallowed rankings possessed a cultivation at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, and their combat strength was extraordinary as well. If Xiaochen wanted to ascend the holy rankings, his cultivation would have to break through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor stage at the very least. After all, it was basically impossible to surmount a realm of cultivation to defeat an enemy. The matter of the holy rankings wasn't urgent for now. At this moment, Xiaochen's expression didn't change much when he faced the saint's gaze. The 2 of us are disciples of the sacred palace. We were besieged by the Ghost Emperor sect, so Xiaochen gave a simple explanation of what happened. However, the saint was stunned when he heard his name, and then he interrupted Xiaochen with an excited expression. "You're Xiaochen, the number 1 holy son of the sacred palace? Senior, you know me?" Xiaochen was puzzled when he heard this and saw the excited expression on the saint's face. He definitely didn't know the saint. Of course, Xiaochen hadn't expected the saint to be so excited when he heard his name. It was as if the saint had been searching for him for a long time. Actually, Xiaochen's guess wasn't wrong. This saint was a deacon of the Heavenly Yang sect, and the Heavenly Yang sect had indeed been searching for Xiaochen for a long time. Even their outpost had received an order from the Heavenly Yang sect to search for Xiaochen's whereabouts with all their strength. Moreover, the most puzzling thing was that this order had actually been issued by Yinyangzi himself. How could someone who could make the great sage Yinyangzi give the order to search for be simple? So, this saint had instantly become excited when he heard Xiaochen's name. He'd been searching for Xiaochen's whereabouts all this time, but unfortunately, he'd been unable to find anything. Yet now, Xiaochen had actually taken the initiative to appear before him, so how could he not be excited? Seeing that Xiaochen had acknowledged his identity, the saint's attitude immediately underwent a 180-degree change, and he became very polite. "Little friend Xiaochen, you may not know this, but the Sacred Palace has already become a subsidiary sect of the Heavenly Yang sect, so we've also received orders to search for your whereabouts." The saint didn't know why Yinyangzi was trying so hard to search for Xiaochen's whereabouts. After all, his status was still too low. However, the quasi-saint supreme sovereign in charge of the outpost definitely knew something. Therefore, the saint invited Xiaochen and the others into the outpost and then ordered someone to report this to the quasi-saint supreme sovereign. This stronghold was a small city. The city walls weren't high and there weren't many houses. There was a courtyard in the center, and this was the residence of the quasi-sage great sovereign who was in charge of this stronghold. After being invited into the courtyard's front hall, Xiaochen and the others took their seats. However, Xiaochen still felt a little strange. What was the Heavenly Yang sect doing? Especially that saint. Was there a need to be so polite to him? Xiaochen naturally couldn't imagine that he was now a famous person in the Heavenly Yang sect. After all, there weren't many people who could make Yinyangzi pay so much attention to him. Unfortunately, he'd only heard of his name and never seen him in person. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1248. Sitting in the front hall, Xiaochen naturally didn't know that he was already famous in the Taiyang sect. However, such a reputation had actually brought Xiaochen some trouble. There were only two reasons for this. First, Yingyangzi valued Xiaochen greatly. Just think about it, Yingyangzi was the great sage. In the entire human territory, how many people of the younger generation of the human race would want to be looked at by Yingyangzi, let alone the Taiyang sect and the Tianyin sect? However, Yingyangzi had never paid much attention to the younger generation of the human race. This time, however, the importance Yingyangzi showed to Xiaochen shocked everyone. However, in addition to the shock, it was inevitable that jealousy would spread wildly. Many people wanted to see who exactly Xiaochen was and whether he had 3 heads and 6 arms to make Yingyangzi value him so highly. This was the first reason. The second reason was because of Qinling, Long Qing, Qin Yu, and the other chosen of the sacred palace, as well as Qin Shuru, Gu Ling Yao, and Fairy of 100 Flowers. Now, everyone had entered the Taiyang sect to cultivate, including Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs and the sacred palace Saint Venerables. They had all become guest elders or deacons of the Taiyang sect. As a quasi-sage sect from the North Star boundary, the sacred palace had no foundation in the central world, but so many geniuses had emerged. Moreover, Qinling and the other chosen received extremely high treatment as soon as they entered the sacred palace. In particular, Qinling, Long Qing, and Qin Yu were directly appointed as the prospective chosen of the Taiyang sect by Yingyangzi. What would the senior disciples think? It would be difficult not to be jealous, right? Because of the above two reasons, the people of the sacred palace didn't get along well with the other factions of the Taiyang sect. To put it bluntly, the sacred palace was an outsider. He didn't have any foundation. In addition, Qin Shuru and the other 2 women were also very hated in the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. In just a few days after entering the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, the 3 women had already received many pursuers from the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Even the Holy Son of the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect had joined in. Fortunately, Yingyangzi had spoken first, and also had the intention to take care of the sacred palace people, so these people restrained themselves a lot. Although they did not dare to do anything out of line on the surface, it was hard to say what would happen behind their backs. All in all, Xiaochen was valued by Yingyangzi. The sacred palace could become a subsidiary sect of the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, and Qinling, Long Qing, and the others could enter the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect to cultivate. It could be said that the advantages outweighed the disadvantages. Moreover, such things were unavoidable. If the sacred palace wanted to gain a firm foothold in the central world, these were things they had to go through. Of course, Xiaochen was unaware of all this. He was sitting in the front hall and drinking tea while waiting. Long Yang couldn't help but tease him. "Brother Xiaochen, you said before that you can't even protect yourself. Why do I feel like you have a very high status in the human race?" When that saint heard your name just now, he immediately acted like he had seen his father. "Ha, if you say you won't take care of us, then you're not a good brother." Long Yang teased. In fact, Xiaochen was also very puzzled about this matter and had no idea what was going on. Therefore, when he heard Long Yang's words, Xiaochen rolled his eyes at him and couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with him. He directly rolled his eyes at Long Yang. To be honest, when Xiaochen and Long Yang were together, there was no respect, and there was no flattery. Even though Xiaochen already knew that Long Yang was a holy son on the saint rankings, Xiaochen's attitude towards him still didn't change. Perhaps Xiaochen's personality had always been like this. He didn't have the habit of following behind others and flattering them. If others saw Xiaochen's attitude towards Long Yang, many of them would probably be speechless. After all, Long Yang was the 3rd holy son on the saint rankings and ranked in the top 3. In the entire Central World's younger generation, there were probably less than 5 people besides Xiaochen who dared to speak to Long Yang without restraint. Of course, Xiaochen still didn't know that Long Yang was the 3rd holy son on the saint rankings because Long Yang hadn't mentioned it. However, even if he knew, Xiaochen probably wouldn't think too much about it. So what if he was 3rd? Xiao Chen wouldn't be envious or flatter Long Yang because he firmly believed that he would definitely catch up to Long Yang. Perhaps it was because Xiao Chen's attitude towards him was different that Long Yang felt a sense of sincerity. Therefore, Long Yang felt very comfortable when interacting with Xiao Chen. At this time, the two of them didn't know that their relationship was becoming more and more harmonious under this kind of subtle influence. Princess Fengju had also slowly integrated into the four of them in just 1 or 2 days and enjoyed this kind of relationship very much. The four of them were very relaxed and sincere together. No one needed to flatter the other and they could say whatever they wanted to say. It was indeed very relaxing. They chatted casually in the front hall. About 10 minutes later, an old man appeared in the hall. Needless to say, this old man was naturally the person in charge of this stronghold, an elder from the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect and a quasi-saint supreme sovereign. Xiao Chen didn't know the old man's name, so he didn't know how to address him. He could only cup his hands and salute. Junior Xiao Chen greets Senior. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the old man smiled very kindly and said, "Ha, this old man is called Hua Feng. You are Xiao Chen, the first chosen of the sacred palace?" The old man's name was Hua Feng, and he was an elder of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Coincidentally, Hua Feng was present at the sacred palace's talent test, so he could be said to have personally witnessed how many abnormal monsters were hidden in the sacred palace. It had been almost a month since the talent assessment. However, Hua Feng's memory was still fresh in his mind, especially towards Chen Ling, Long Qing and Chen Yu. It was also because of the shock that Hua Feng was also very curious about Xiao Chen. Therefore, after receiving the news, he personally showed up to meet him. Otherwise, with Hua Feng's status, even if he had news of Xiao Chen, there was no need for him to show up in person. He only needed his subordinates to send Xiao Chen back to the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. As he spoke, Hua Feng sized up Xiao Chen with great interest. His first impression was very good. Although Xiao Chen's cultivation was only at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, his temperament wasn't inferior to the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect's chosen at all. Hua Feng nodded slightly to show his satisfaction, and then he turned to look at Long Yang and Fengju with a smile on his face. "Long Yang, Fengju, the two great chosen of the beast race, why are you interested in coming to my human race?" "Ha, Senior Hua Feng, we came with brother Xiao Chen." "Senior, you won't turn us away, right?" Long Yang chuckled when he heard Hua Feng's words. "Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." Chapter 1249. Not only was Long Yang not nervous in front of Hua Feng, he even had a cheeky smile on his face. Beside him, Fengju didn't even speak. Long Yang and Fengju weren't just chosen and chosen ranked in the top 10 of the saint ranking. Their identities were also extraordinary. Therefore, even though Hua Feng was a quasi-saint supreme sovereign, Long Yang and Fengju still didn't feel nervous in front of him. Hua Feng clearly didn't care about Long Yang's attitude and smiled faintly. Of course not. Hua Feng naturally wouldn't stop the two saints from entering the human territory. After saying that, Hua Feng turned his gaze to Tianyu and nodded with a smile as a form of greeting. Everyone then took their seats with Hua Feng sitting in the main seat. After some conversation, Xiao Chen learned about the current situation of the sacred palace from Hua Feng. At the same time, he also learned that Chen Ling, Long Qing, and Qin Shuru were all cultivating in the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Xiao Chen secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It was good that everyone in the sacred palace was safe and sound. As for the rest, he wasn't in a hurry. During the conversation, Hua Feng couldn't help but secretly praise Xiao Chen's temperament. In the end, Hua Feng asked Xiao Chen when he planned to go to the sacred palace. In this regard, Xiao Chen naturally didn't want to waste any time and said that he was prepared to leave today. Hua Feng had no intention of stopping Xiao Chen. He immediately gave Xiao Chen a token of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. With this token, Xiao Chen could save a lot of trouble in the human territory. Moreover, he could occasionally use the various teleportation arrays in the human territory unconditionally. This made traveling much more convenient. Xiao Chen accepted the token and cupped his hands to express his gratitude. Then, without further delay, the four of them left the stronghold and headed for the hinterland of the human territory. With the tokens of the Skyene and Sun sect, no one dared to provoke them. However, because Long Yang and Feng Ju were beasts, there were still some ignorant people who came to cause trouble in every city. After all, the appearance of the beast race in the human territory was the same as the appearance of the human race in the beast race's territory. However, Long Yang and Feng Ju didn't care about this at all. Even when facing some saints and quasi-saints, the two of them were indifferent. It made sense. With their identities as chosen on the hallowed rankings, the older generation cultivators wouldn't dare do anything to them. The journey was relatively peaceful, and Xiao Chen's group arrived at the sacred palace 7 days later. The holy palace wasn't too far away from the heavenly yin-yang sect. It was a good place to establish a sect. Compared to before, the sacred palace hadn't changed much. The main peak in the center was still guarded by 10 saint peaks. A total of 11 peaks formed the entire layout of the sacred palace. Of course, the 10 great sacred halls were also preserved. They didn't hide their whereabouts and flew towards the dustless sacred hall. However, when the four approached the dustless sacred hall, a dozen sacred palace experts suddenly appeared in front of them. The leader was a sacred venerate. He didn't see Xiao Chen's identity at first, so he shouted coldly, "Who are you?" Xiao Sheng and the others naturally couldn't let their guard down. Therefore, Xiao Chen's group was discovered as soon as they approached. Faced with this Saint Lord's question, Xiao Chen leaped into the air and came before this Saint Lord. When this Saint Lord saw Xiao Chen's face clearly, he was stunned for a moment before exclaiming with a face full of joy. Xiao Chen, he didn't expect the person to be Xiao Chen. Everyone in the sacred palace was extremely nervous about Xiao Chen's disappearance. After all, Xiao Chen meant a lot to the sacred palace. He was the first chosen and could be said to be the idol of all sacred palace disciples. Now that Xiao Chen had returned safely, Xiao Chen smiled and cupped his hands in greeting. Then, the sacred venerate glanced at Long Yang and Feng Ju beside Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen smiled and said, "They are my friends. It was all thanks to their help that I was able to avert danger." After briefly introducing Long Yang and Feng Ju, a strange look flashed across the sacred venerate's eyes when he heard that the two were chosen on the sacred ranking. However, it only lasted for a moment. A chosen on the sacred ranking was one of the top figures of the younger generation in the central world. This was the first time the sacred venerate had seen one, but now wasn't the time to dwell on it. He immediately smiled and said, "Chosen Xiao Chen has returned safely. I'm sure the patriarchs will be very happy if they know. However, the patriarchs aren't in the sacred palace right now. They have all gone to the heavenly yin solar sect to cultivate." While personally welcoming Xiao Chen into the sacred palace, the sacred venerate also told Xiao Chen about the situation in the sacred palace. He learned that Xiao Shen's group of four, the chosen, Gudu Wuya, Ouyang Roshue, and Qin Shuru were all cultivating in the heavenly yin solar sect. Xiao Chen didn't say much after learning this. He immediately headed to the Wuchen Sacred Hall and ordered people to prepare accommodations for Long Yang and Feng Ju. Xiao Chen smiled apologetically. "Brother Long Yang, Princess Feng Ju, the two of you can take a stroll around the Wuchen Sacred Hall. I want to see my parents. I'm sure they're worried about us after not hearing from us for so long." Since he had returned safely, he naturally wanted to see his parents. Long Yang waved his hand with a smile when he heard Xiao Chen's words. "Brother Xiao Chen, go ahead. Feng Ju and I will also take a stroll around." After indicating Xiao Chen to do as he pleased, Xiao Chen called over a half-saint elder of the Wuchen Sacred Hall and asked him to take care of Long Yang and Feng Ju. As long as it was their request, the elder would try his best to satisfy it. After settling Long Yang and Feng Ju, Xiao Chen took Tianyu to the courtyard where Bai Ruyue and Xiao Qing lived. Just as Xiao Chen thought, the two elders were indeed very worried because of his disappearance this time. It could be said that they didn't have any appetite. Under such worries, the two elders' mental state was a lot worse. But today, when they heard that Xiao Chen had returned safely, the two elders were naturally very excited. they originally wanted to see Xiaochen in person, but Xiaochen had already brought Tianyu to the two elders' residence. Seeing that Xiaochen appeared in front of him safe and sound, Xiaoqing only secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but he did not show it on his face. However, Bai Ruiyue was different. As a woman, the first time she saw Xiaochen, Bai Ruiyue's eyes were already red. She hugged Xiaochen and said excitedly, "Thank you for your help. Chener, it's good that you're fine. Do you know that mother was worried to death about you?" Bai Ruiyue's worry was naturally not fake. Hearing this, Xiaochen also said softly, "Mother, I'm back. Don't worry, your child is fine." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1250. After Xiaochen had returned safely, Bai Ruiyue's heart that had been hanging in the air was finally at ease. However, the incident this time had indeed caused Bai Ruiyue to feel a lingering fear. She disregarded Xiaochen's objection and held Xiaochen's hand as she started to repeatedly warn him. "Chener, you can't do such a dangerous thing in the future. What would your father and I do if something were to happen to you?" Even though Xiaochen felt helpless in his heart when facing his mother's nagging, he could only nod incessantly and promise that he wouldn't do such a dangerous thing in the future. Actually, what do you think Xiaochen could do about the incident this time? The Ghost Emperor's sex Exalt Gui Shuang was already in such a state. Could Xiaochen, who was merely at the Perfection Dao Emperor realm, go against the great sage? It could be said that the incident this time was completely unavoidable. However, Xiaochen obviously wouldn't say this to Bai Ruiyue. When he saw his mother's worried expression, Xiaochen could only speak some words of comfort and ceaselessly console Bai Ruiyue. At the same time, Tianyu was supporting Xiaochen from the side. Under their consolation, Bai Ruiyue's mood slowly improved. After her mood improved, Bai Ruiyue started to pull Tianyu to talk about the private matters between women. On the other hand, Xiaochen had a rare moment of peace and quiet. He and his father, Xiaoqing, sat down in the pavilion in the courtyard, and the father and son drank wine as they chatted. Actually, Xiaoqing's worry wasn't any less than Bai Ruiyue's when Xiaochen went missing and his fate was unknown. However, he was a man, so it was naturally impossible for him to express his feelings like a woman. So, even though Xiaoqing was worried in his heart and was indeed delighted when he saw Xiaochen, Xiaoqing didn't say anything from the beginning until the end. "It's good that you're back." While the father and son were drinking wine in the pavilion, Xiaoqing spoke at this moment. "Bing Ning and the others have already gone to the heavenly yin-yang sect." "I know." Hearing Xiaoqing's words, Xiaochen replied indifferently. When he was with Xiaoqing, the father and son spoke very casually and simply. "Yes, but the three of them are in the yin and yang sect. Although Chenling and Longqing are taking care of them, they still can't compare to you. Since you're back, when do you plan to go to the yin and yang sect?" Xiaoqing asked. "Let's rest for a few days. I want to spend more time with you and mother," Xiaochen replied. He definitely had to go to the heavenly yin and taiyang sects, but he wasn't in a hurry. Xiaochen planned to rest in the Saint Palace for a few days. At the same time, he could spend some time with the two elders before heading to the heavenly yin and taiyang sects. Speaking of which, Xiaochen didn't know if the two elders could adapt to the central world. Moreover, he probably wouldn't have much time with them in the future, so Xiaochen wasn't in a hurry to go to the heavenly yin and taiyang sects. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xiaoqing nodded slightly. "Think about it yourself. Now that you've grown up, your mother and I can no longer make decisions for you. Father also knows that you can't always be by our side, so you don't have to worry about us. With old He and old Bai here, you don't have to worry about our safety." The old He and old Bai Xiaoqing spoke of were Elder Master Bai, who had been by Xiaochen's side in the Tiana continent. The two of them had now become Xiaoqing and Bai Ruiyue's old housekeepers and were responsible for their safety. After so many years, Elder Master Bai had also become a Saint Realm expert. Of course, it was thanks to Xiaochen's help. They had successfully stepped into the Saint Realm with Xiaochen's help, so the two elders were dead set on Xiaochen. Xiaochen was also very assured that they would protect his parents. Hearing Xiao Qing's words, Xiaochen nodded slightly and said, "Father is right, but don't worry. I'll pay attention to my safety in the future. I'll come back to accompany you more often when I have time." "It's good that you're considerate." Xiao Qing nodded with a smile in response. Xiao Qing saw things far more clearly than Bai Ruyue. As Xiao Qing, he knew very well that his son was a dragon among men, and as parents, he and Bai Ruyue couldn't do much. Moreover, the two of them weren't very talented, so in Xiao Qing's opinion, he only had two wishes in this life. One was that his son would become a dragon, and the other was that his family could live together peacefully. After chatting with Xiao Qing for more than 2 hours, Bai Ruyue personally cooked a table full of dishes, and the family sat down to eat together. It was a rare moment of peace. While Xiaochen was accompanying his parents, in the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect not far from the sacred palace, 100 Flower Fairies' residence. After successfully entering the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, Qin Shuru and the other two girls had relied on their own talents to become core disciples of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Their status wasn't inferior to Emperor Qing and the other sacred palace chosens. Core disciples could already have their own cave abodes. However, at this moment, in 100 Flower Fairies' cave abode, there was a young man in a white robe sitting in the garden, looking at 100 Flower Fairy in front of him with a gentle smile. 100 Flower, the heavenly Yin Valley will open in half a month. This time, I've specially asked for a spot for you. Take this token and you can directly enter the heavenly Yin Valley. The young man's name was Bai Churan. His name wasn't just famous in the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, but also in the entire human race. This was because Bai Churan was a chosen of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, a chosen on the saint ranking. He was ranked 93rd on the saint ranking. 93rd might sound low at first glance, and could be considered the bottom of the saint ranking. However, one couldn't forget that the central world's population was countless, and only 100 people could make it onto the saint ranking. On the saint leaderboard, even those ranked at the bottom were enough to make countless people look up to them and envy them. In the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, there were only 2 chosens on the saint ranking, and Bai Churan was one of them. From this, one could see how high Bai Churan's status was. As for the heavenly Yin Valley, it was one of the top cultivation secret realms of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. It was extremely famous in the entire human race. It was far from the sacred palace's celestial demon mountain or the ghost realm. Countless disciples of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect were shocked by the opening of the heavenly Yin Valley. They would do anything to obtain a spot, but Bai Churan was giving a spot to 100 Flower Fairy for free. However, 100 Flower Fairy's expression was indifferent in the face of Bai Churan's goodwill. Her voice was cold as she said, "Senior brother Bai is too polite. I don't dare accept such a generous gift. Please take it back." His expression was still calm, but it gave people a feeling of being 1,000 miles away. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1251. Bai Churan had given such a precious spot to heavenly Yin Valley to Baihua Fairy just like that. Baihua Fairy naturally knew what Bai Churan was thinking because it wasn't the first time Bai Churan had expressed his love for Baihua Fairy. However, Baihua Fairy didn't accept Bai Churan's love at all and had already rejected him outright. She told Bai Churan that she already had a husband. Pursuing a woman who already had a husband wasn't something to be proud of, but Bai Churan didn't give up. In his opinion, so what if Baihua Fairy was already married? Moreover, Baihua Fairy's appearance stunned Bai Churan at first glance. Of course, Bai Churan wasn't just infatuated with Baihua Fairy. He also coveted Qin Shuru and Guling Yao. The 3 women were all devastatingly beautiful, but in comparison, Bai Churan preferred Baihua Fairy. She was soft and gentle like water. Therefore, he wanted to pursue Baihua Fairy. He planned to pursue Qin Shuru and Guling Yao after he won her over. He didn't care about anything else at all. At the same time, Bai Churan also knew that Qin Shuru, Baihua Fairy, and Guling Yao all had the same husband. He was the so-called first chosen of the sacred palace, Xiaochen. He was currently missing and no one knew if he was alive or dead. Baichuran had already investigated everything in secret. When she heard 100 Flower Fairy's indifferent yet unapproachable answer, she continued to smile and said, "Junior sister, this is a spot that I asked for with great difficulty. If you don't accept it, won't it be embarrassing for me?" One had to admit that Baichuran's smile was very contagious and gave off an extremely warm feeling. Unfortunately, the falling flower had feelings for the heartless brook. Baihua Fairy snorted disdainfully at Baichuran's pursuit. Ever since she followed Xiaochen, Baihua Fairy no longer cared about any man. Therefore, Baihua Fairy smiled indifferently. "Thank you, senior brother, but I really can't accept it. If there's nothing else, senior brother, please leave. I'm going to start cultivating." Baichuran refused again and directly asked her to leave. Hearing Flower Fairy's words, Baichuran could no longer keep a straight face. A trace of coldness flashed through her eyes. At the same time, Green Bamboo and Siju, who were in charge of serving Flower Fairy, stepped forward and spoke politely to Baichuran. "Senior brother Bai, please." The three women entered the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect to cultivate. Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and Lan, Lu Zhu, and Siju naturally followed them. They were responsible for taking care of the three women. Among them, Lu Zhu and Siju were responsible for taking care of 100 Flower Fairy. Flower Fairy naturally trusted Green Bamboo and Siju completely. She didn't care what Baichuran thought. When Green Bamboo and Siju came forward, Flower Fairy was already preparing to leave. However, before 100 Flower Fairy could get very far, Baichuran spoke up from behind her. "Junior sister, we don't even know if your husband, Xiaochen, is dead or alive. Do you plan on continuing like this? And I, Baichuran, am a saint on the saint rankings, one of the two saints of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. How am I inferior to Xiaochen? How am I not good enough for you?" He had been pursuing Flower Fairy for some time now, but Baichuran had been rejected time and time again. This was the complete opposite of the past, when Baichuran only needed to beckon with her finger and those women would throw themselves at her. Baichuran didn't like this feeling at all. At this moment, Baichuran finally couldn't suppress the anger in her heart and asked coldly. Hearing Baichuran's words, 100 Flower Fairy didn't turn around. Instead, she said indifferently, "If my husband is dead, then 100 Flower Fairy won't continue living. I'm willing to die with my husband. You don't need to worry about this, senior brother. Moreover, 100 Flower Fairy believes that my husband will definitely be able to avert danger." Xiaochen's disappearance and unknown fate made many people think that Xiaochen was dead for sure. An outsider from the North Star realm, who wasn't familiar with the Central World and didn't have any background, wanted to live in a foreign territory of the Central World. It was almost impossible. However, 100 Flower Fairy and the other two women believed in Xiaochen because along the way, Xiaochen had resolved countless dangers and created countless miracles. Since he had created so many miracles, the three women believed that Xiaochen could create another miracle this time. Hearing 100 Flower Fairy's words, which were full of confidence and love, Baichuran's anger burned even hotter. At this moment, Baichuran's eyes were filled with killing intent. "Even if he isn't, I'll kill him myself." At this moment, Baichuran no longer hid his true intentions. Instead, he directly revealed his murderous intent toward Xiaochen. In Baichuran's view, the reason why 100 Flower Fairy had rejected him time and time again and had never been nice to him was all because of Xiaochen. As long as he killed Xiaochen, he could have 100 Flower Fairy, Qin Shuru, and Gu Lingyao for himself. Come to think of it, Xiaochen was just an outsider, yet he was able to have 3 beautiful wives. This made Baichuran extremely envious and jealous at the same time. In his view, an ant like Xiaochen didn't deserve to have peerless fairies like 100 Flower Fairy and the other 2 women. Baichuran didn't hold back at all. Hearing this, 100 Flower Fairy stopped and turned around. But at this time, 100 Flower Fairy's face was full of coldness. She stared at Baichuran. Although she had rejected Baichuran before, because of his status, 100 Flower Fairy was still polite. But now, Bai Qiuran said that he wanted to kill Xiaochen. How could 100 Flower Fairy not be angry? She stared coldly at Bai Qiuran, but soon, 100 Flower Fairy smiled coldly and said, "You can't kill him. If my husband comes back, the one who dies will be you." Then, without waiting for Bai Qiuran's reply, 100 Flower Fairy turned and left. Bai Qiuran was strong, but so what? In 100 Flower Fairy's heart, Xiaochen was the strongest person. In this world, no one could stand shoulder to shoulder with Xiaochen. This was 100 Flower Fairy's confidence in Xiaochen, and also her love for Xiaochen. She believed that Xiaochen could defeat any strong enemy. Her words were full of contempt, and her eyes were full of mockery. Looking at 100 Flower Fairy's departing figure, Bai Qiuran recalled what she had said before. Bai Qiuran felt that his self-esteem had been trampled. A woman dared to look down on him, and it was for another man. Bai Qiuran said fiercely, "Xiaochen, if you really survive, I will kill you. Also, 100 Flower Fairy, since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for it. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1252. Bai Qiuran was infuriated by 100 Flower Fairy's disdain. Bai Qiuran said coldly as she watched 100 Flower Fairy's departing figure. Bai Qiuran was about to leave when she inadvertently glanced at Green Bamboo and Siju, who were also standing beside her with cold expressions. This was not the first time he had seen Green Bamboo and Siju. He had to admit that even though they were just maids, they were equally beautiful. However, because they had always been by 100 Flower Fairy's side, the two of them naturally had a feeling that they were just leaves. At this moment, the furious Bai Qiuran suddenly caught sight of Green Bamboo and Siju. Bai Qiuran was slightly taken aback by the beauty of the two women, and then an extremely evil thought quietly rose in her mind. She quietly left 100 Flower Fairy's cave dwelling, then returned to her own cave dwelling. At the same time, she anxiously called over 4 of her trusted disciples. They were all prospective holy sons of the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect. As a supreme saint sect, the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect only had 2 holy sons, but they had many prospective holy sons. There were already several hundred of them. Of course, several hundred was only a drop in the ocean compared to the nearly 1 million disciples of the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect. Moreover, the reason why there was such a huge difference in the number of holy sons and prospective holy sons was because of the saint ranking. This was because no sect in the central world had the right to confer the title of holy son. Moreover, even if you conferred the title, they wouldn't acknowledge it. Only those who could enter the saint ranking and obtain the recognition of the will of the heavenly way could become a publicly recognized holy son or holy daughter in the central world. Therefore, the number of holy sons and prospective holy sons in the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect was completely disproportionate. When the 4 candidates arrived at Bai Qiuran's residence, they were all extremely respectful to her. Bai Qiuran, who was seated on the main seat, had a fiery look on her face as she said, "Don't worry. Tonight, the 4 of you will secretly go to Bai Hua Fairy's cave and capture her 2 maids for me. This is the token for Bai Hua Fairy's cave. With this token, you will be able to enter without any problems. After each immortal's cave was distributed to the disciples, there would naturally be defensive measures. However, as long as they held the token, these talisman arrays that were responsible for protecting the immortal's cave would no longer have any effect. Normally, each abode would have 2 tokens. One would be kept by the owner of the abode, while the other would be kept by the Chor Hall of the Yin and Yang sect. With Bai Qiuran's status, it was naturally not difficult for her to obtain the token of Flower Fairy's abode from the Chor Hall. They didn't know why Bai Qiuran wanted to capture Si Ju and Lu Zhu, but the 4 candidates didn't hesitate and immediately agreed. They were only capturing 2 women, and they weren't disciples of the Heavenly Yin or Taiyang sect. This wasn't a big deal to them. Bai Qiuran smiled coldly as she watched the 4 people leave with the tokens. "Fairy of 100 flowers, I can't touch you, but I can touch your maids. I don't believe that the ancestor will punish me for Wei Wei and her 2 maids. Due to Yin Yangzi's secret protection, Bai Qiuran didn't dare to do anything to Hundred Flower Fairy openly. However, Si Ju and Lu Zhu were different. They didn't have much status in the yin and yang sects. In her fury today, Bai Qiuran inadvertently glanced at them and had a wicked thought. She wanted to rape Si Ju and Lu Zhu. Isn't Fairy of 100 Flowers cold and arrogant? Isn't your husband Xiaochen the only one in your heart? Fine, Bai Qiuran, can't do anything to you for now. In that case, I'll sleep with your two maids and see what you can do. Moreover, although Green Bamboo and Si Ju were not as beautiful as Fairy of 100 Flowers, they were still top-notch beauties. Bai Qiuran was more than happy to sleep with such women. Soon, night fell. Inside Flower Fairy's cave residence, Flower Fairy was cultivating in the training room. At the same time, Green Bamboo and Si Ju were also cultivating. No one noticed that four figures had silently entered 100 Flower Fairy's dwelling under the cover of night. Because there were only 100 Flower Fairy, Si Ju, and Lu Zhu in the dwelling, no one noticed them along the way. They were none other than the four candidates who had come to kidnap Si Ju and Lu Zhu under Bai Qiuran's orders. Along the way, it had to be said that the luck of these four people was indeed very good. Very quickly, the four of them arrived at the courtyard where Green Bamboo and Si Ju lived. Caught off guard, Green Bamboo and Si Chrysanthemum were quickly captured. Then, they were quickly taken out of the cave and safely brought to Bai Qiuran's cave. Within a small courtyard within Bai Qiuran's dwelling. Bai Qiuran strode into the courtyard and glanced at the four candidates who were standing respectfully in the courtyard. She revealed a wisp of a smile as she spoke. That's right. Where is she? Candidate, she's in the room, but we've already knocked her out, one of them replied. No worries. You four stay here and don't let anyone in, Bai Qiuran said with a smile and strode into the room. The room was dimly lit by candlelight. Si Ju and Lu Zhu were lying unconscious on the bed. Bai Qiuran easily woke them up. When they saw Bai Qiuran in front of them, they were stunned at first, but they quickly spoke with cold expressions. Senior Bai, what is the meaning of this? The two women's attitudes were very cold. Seeing this, Bai Qiuran directly slapped Green Bamboo's face. At the same time, she said with a cold expression. How dare two mermaids speak to me like that? You're courting death. But soon, Bai Qiuran's lips curled into a smile. Although the two of you are maidservants, your looks are passable. This saint has been pursuing 100 Flower Fairy for a long time, but that B*TCH is not moved at all. Fine, since I can't get that B*TCH for now, it's not a bad idea for me to sleep with the two of you first. I wonder how that B*TCH will feel when she finds out that I've slept with the two of you, haha. At this point, there was no need for Bai Qiuran to hide anything. Besides, the sight of Si Ju and Lu Zhu's alluring bodies made Bai Qiuran's heart burn with passion. A unique impulse of a man swept through his body. Upon hearing Bai Qiuran's words and watching as he approached them step by step, Green Bamboo and Si Chrysanthemum sulked. They didn't expect this gentle and refined Bai Qiuran to do such a thing. He actually wanted to do such a thing to them. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 1253. In truth, Bai Qiuran didn't really like Green Bamboo and Si Ju. He was just angry because of 100 Flower Fairy's rejection, which was why he did this to the two girls. Seeing Bai Qiuran approaching step by step, the two girls' expressions changed drastically, and they cried out, "Our young master won't let you off." Our young master? Bai Qiuran's expression darkened when he heard this. It was Xiaochen again. For some reason, whenever Bai Qiuran heard the name Xiaochen, his heart would burn with anger. Logically speaking, Bai Qiuran and Xiaochen had never met before, but Bai Qiuran was filled with killing intent towards Xiaochen. A cold smile immediately appeared on Bai Qiuran's face. He walked towards the two girls with a sneer and said slowly, "Xiaochen, do you think I care about someone whose life or death is unknown? Even if he's right in front of me, what can he do?" As she spoke, Bai Qiuran casually pointed out two fingers. Two rays of light flashed and entered the two women's dantians, sealing their cultivation in an instant. In front of Baichuran, the two girls clearly had no power to resist. With their cultivation sealed, they could only watch as Baichuran approached them step by step. Unable to resist, the two girls' hearts were filled with terror and deep determination. If Baichuran really got his way this time, the two girls definitely couldn't continue living in this world. In fact, from the beginning, Qingyao, Qingluo, Feimei, and Lan, Green Bamboo, and Siju had feelings for Xiaochen. However, the six girls had always known that they weren't good enough for Xiaochen. In addition, Xiaochen had Qin Shuru and the other three girls by his side, so the six girls knew very well that they were only Xiaochen's mates. Even so, the six girls were already very satisfied. They had no complaints at all to be able to serve Xiaochen and the four madams. However, if Baichuran got his way and lost their chastity, Green Bamboo and Siju felt that they were no longer qualified to serve Xiaochen. Baichuran's eyes flashed with determination. Sensing the change in the two girls' expressions, he immediately laughed. What? You want to commit suicide? Save it. You don't even have the ability to commit suicide in front of me. What a joke. How could Baichuran let Green Bamboo and Siju commit suicide? He wanted to see what expression Flower Fairy would have when she found out. That bitch. Baichuran's heart burned with anger at the thought of Flower Fairy's contempt for him. Without thinking much, Baichuran arrived on the bed in a few steps and pounced on the two girls like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey. While Baichuran was acting like a beast, Qinshuru, Flower Fairy, Guling Yao, Long Qing, Qinling, Qinyu, and the other chosen of the sacred palace barged into Baichuran's cave dwelling. In fact, not long after Green Bamboo and Siju were kidnapped, Qinshuru personally went to find Flower Fairy. Qinshuru originally planned to tell Flower Fairy about Xiaochen. Xiaochen had returned to the sacred palace today. Such important news was naturally reported to Qinshuru as soon as possible. Qinshuru was naturally overjoyed when he received the news. He immediately called Guling Yao to find Flower Fairy. It was supposed to be a good thing, but who would have thought that after arriving at Flower Fairy's cave dwelling, they would not see Green Bamboo and Siju. Instead, they found some traces of a fight in the two girls' room. The two girls' inexplicable disappearance, and after some questioning, a disciple happened to see the four prospective chosen enter Baichuran's cave dwelling from afar. After learning this clue, the group naturally came to Baichuran's cave dwelling without hesitation. Qinshuru and the others still did not know why Baichuran ordered people to kidnap Green Bamboo and Siju, but they were already burning with anxiety and naturally did not care about anything else. They directly barged into Baichuran's cave abode. With Qinling, Long Qing, and Qinyu around, the group fought their way in. In the courtyard, they saw the four prospective holy sons of the two girls. Moreover, as soon as they entered the courtyard, they heard Green Bamboo and Siju's angry curses from the room. At the same time, they also heard Baichuran's cold laughter. Scream all you want. This is my cave dwelling. What's the use even if you scream yourself hoarse? When they heard this, how could they not know what Baichuran wanted? Qinshuru and the other two girls' pretty faces were already icy cold. Qinling did not say anything and directly attacked the four prospective chosen. These four were all Baichuran's lackeys. It was obviously impossible to make them move aside, so it was better to just attack. After Qinling took the lead, Long Qing, Qinyu, and the other sacred palace chosen also attacked. Seeing this, the four prospective chosen's expression darkened. You're courting death. Immediately, a great battle broke out in the courtyard. Qinling and the others had just joined the Taiyang sect. Although Qinling, Long Qing, and Qinyu's talent was not inferior to Baichuran's, their current strength was not as strong as Baichuran's. At most, they were evenly matched with the four prospective chosen in front of them. They were not confident that they could take down the four prospective chosen in a short time, so after the battle, Qinling said to Qinshuru and the other two girls, "Hurry up and go in to save them." The four prospective chosen were already being held back by Qinling and the others. When they heard Chenling's words, Qin Shuru and the other two girls did not hesitate and immediately rushed into the room. Bai Qiuran naturally noticed the commotion in the courtyard. Just as Qin Shuru and the other two girls were about to rush into the room, Bai Qiuran also stood up from the bed and prepared to check the situation outside. At a glance, the three girls saw Green Bamboo and Si Ju lying on the bed with their cultivation sealed by Bai Qiuran. Their clothes were also torn to shreds. Fortunately, Bai Qiuran had not succeeded yet. Fortunately, everyone had arrived in time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Seeing Qin Shuru and the other two girls stride into the courtyard with Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and Enlan behind them, Green Bamboo and Si Ju called out tearfully, "Madam." Seeing this, one could imagine how Qin Shuru and the other two girls felt. Gu Lingyao even scolded Bai Qiuran angrily, "Bai Qiuran, you're a beast. How could a chosen on the saint ranking do such a thing?" Gu Lingyao scolded angrily. Flower Fairy and Qin Shuru's faces were cold. Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and Enlan quickly walked to the bed and comforted Green Bamboo and Si Ju while taking out new clothes from their storage rings to cover the two girls' bodies. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1254. After helping Green Bamboo and Si Ju put on their clothes, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and Enlan helped Green Bamboo and Si Ju to stand behind Qin Shuru and the other two girls. However, the two girls were still in shock. Bai Qiuran had no intention of stopping Qing Yao and Qing Luo. She merely stared at Flower Fairy and the other two girls. Bai Qiuran's strange calmness made Flower Fairy feel that something was wrong. What was she trying to do? In terms of strength, the three girls were obviously no match for Bai Qiuran. Even with Chenling, Long Qing, Qin Yu, and the others outside the room, they were no match for Bai Qiuran. Even the four prospective saints, Chenling, and the others would have a hard time defeating them. At most, they could only fight to a draw. Don't underestimate the prospective saints of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin. Any prospective saint of the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin had the strength of a saint in the North Star boundary. There was a huge difference in strength between the two sides, and Bai Qiuran's calmness was a little strange. Flower Fairy naturally felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, a crazed look flashed through Bai Qiuran's eyes a moment later. The corners of her mouth curled up into a sneer as she spoke indifferently. However, her tone was incomparably gloomy and cold. Originally, I only planned to punish these two little maids a little. However, since all of you are here, I can only change my target. I think that the taste of you three great beauties should be much better than that of the two little maids. Lunatic. Bai Qiuran was definitely a lunatic. After failing to rape Green Bamboo and Si Ju, she changed her target to Flower Fairy and the other two girls. She wanted to rape them. She was definitely crazy. Flower Fairy and the other two girls' expressions changed when they heard Bai Qiuran's words. However, now was not the time to panic. The three girls had always been with Xiaochen. Although they were not as strong as Xiaochen, they were definitely not flower vases. Faced with the current situation, the three girls forced themselves to calm down. Flower Fairy said coldly, "Bai Qiuran, don't you dare. Don't forget about Patriarch Yinyangzi." At this point, she could only use Yinyangzi to intimidate Bai Qiuran. However, Bai Qiuran smiled nonchalantly at Baihua Fairy's words. "Ancestor? I don't believe that the ancestor will really kill me if I force myself on you. At most, it will be a symbolic punishment." Tonight, Bai Qiuran was definitely crazy. After failing to force herself on Green Bamboo and Sea Chrysanthemum, she actually changed her target to Fairy of 100 Flowers. Bai Qiuran had been lusting after the three women for a long time, especially the Fairy of 100 Flowers. It could be said that Bai Qiuran dreamed of having her. Unfortunately, the three women were always cold to her and kept her at a distance. Bai Qiuran was usually patient, but she clearly didn't have that patience tonight. In Bai Churan's opinion, even though Yinyangzi had taken good care of the sacred palace people, so what? Even if she forced herself on Fairy of 100 Flowers, would Yinyangzi really kill her for the sake of righteousness? After all, there were only 2 chosen in the entire Tian'in Taiyang sect. If she killed Bai Churan, the Tian'in Taiyang sect would only have 1 chosen left. Yinyangzi obviously wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Bai Churan could be so fearless because she had anticipated this. At the same time, Bai Churan had thought it through. Given the 3 women's feelings for Xiao Cheng, it was obviously impossible to capture their hearts. Since that was the case, she could only use another method. Even if she couldn't win their hearts, the person who could win their hearts was not bad either. With that thought in mind, Bai Churan took a step forward and instantly arrived in front of 100 Flower Fairy and the other 2 girls. With a casual wave of her hand, Qing Yao and Qing Luo were sent flying out of the room. At the same time, the door closed with a bang. After sending Qing Yao and Qing Luo flying with a slap, only 100 Flower Fairy and the other 2 were left in the room. Bai Churan laughed and said, "You 3B** cheese, I gave you face in the past, but you didn't want it. Today, I'll tell you that I've never failed to get what I want." Bai Churan had already revealed her beastly side. The 3 women didn't panic or cry like Green Bamboo and Sea Chrysanthemum. Qin Shuru shouted coldly, "Bai Churan, you're courting death." With that, Qin Shuru directly attacked. Seeing this, 100 Flower Fairy and Gu Lingyao naturally followed closely behind. The 3 women didn't choose to surrender, but the result was predictable. Even though they joined forces, they were still easily defeated and restrained by Bai Churan. She easily restrained the 3 women. At the same time, Long Qing's shout came from outside the door. "Bai Churan, if you dare to lay a finger on them, I'll definitely kill you." Obviously, Long Qing and the others outside the room also knew what Bai Churan wanted to do. However, because the 4 prospective saints were holding her back, Long Qing and the others couldn't free themselves and could only watch helplessly. Hearing Long Qing's angry shout, Bai Churan smiled faintly. "I forgot. There's also Xiao Chen's second sister. She's also a rare beauty. But that's fine. I can't be too greedy. I think the 3 of you are enough for me to remember tonight." With that, Bai Churan prepared to tear off the 3 women's clothes. At this moment, the 3 women didn't hesitate at all and immediately prepared to commit suicide. The 3 women were chaste people. They would rather die than let Bai Churan have her way. However, Bai Churan had already expected them to commit suicide, so there was no way she would let them have their way. She immediately stopped them. Their suicide attempts didn't succeed. At this moment, Bai Churan had already arrived before the 3 women. She looked down at the 3 women who had fallen to the ground and had their cultivation sealed. A trace of undisguised lust burned in her eyes. "I really don't know what that Xiao Chen did to be able to meet the 3 of you. But it doesn't matter. After tonight, the 3 of you belong to me, Bai Churan." With that, Bai Churan attacked. Her first target was naturally 100 Flower Fairy. Without saying a word, she grabbed 100 Flower Fairy's long skirt and tore it apart. 100 Flower Fairy's undergarments were immediately exposed to Bai Churan. Without the cover of her long skirt, 100 Flower Fairy's seductive body was unobstructed before Bai Churan. Faced with such a scene, how could Bai Churan, who yearned for 100 Flower Fairy day and night, resist? Without saying a word, Bai Churan pounced on 100 Flower Fairy. However, at this moment, the sounds of fighting outside the room stopped. At the same time, a calm figure came from outside the room. "Bai Churan, the ancestor has ordered. Please add, please vote, please recommend." Chapter 1255. In the courtyard, Chen Ling's group and the 4 candidates had stopped fighting. The 2 sides faced each other, and an old man in gray robes stood proudly in the middle. This old man was none other than the old servant by Yinyangzi's side. He had a cultivation base of half-step Great Saint realm. The old man's appearance naturally meant that he knew what had happened here. It made sense. Qianling's group had openly barged into Baichuran's cave, so it was naturally impossible to hide such a thing. In the room, Baichuran, who was about to succeed, suddenly heard this voice. Accompanying the voice was a faintly discernible aura that locked onto Baichuran. There was no need to ask. Baichuran already knew who it was just from this aura. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness, especially when she saw 100 flower fairies' alluring body. Baichuran was even more unwilling to give up. But there was nothing she could do. If it were anyone else, even a half-step great saint, Baichuran might choose to ignore them and have her fun first. However, Baichuran did not dare to do so before the old man. The reason was very simple. It could be said that the old man represented Yinyangzi in the Taiyang sect. There was no doubt that if Baichuran made any moves now, the old man would definitely stop her immediately. At that time, she would lose face. Baichuran was depressed, but the three girls secretly sighed in relief. Just now, 100 Flower Fairy had fallen into complete despair. She had even thought about it. If she was really defiled by Baichuran, then she would definitely not be able to live in this world. After all, she did not know how to face Xiaochen. In that case, she might as well end everything. Fortunately, things did not develop to that point. The old man's appearance allowed the three girls to escape in the end. After standing there for a long while, Baichuran glared fiercely at 100 Flower Fairy, but she still walked out of the room helplessly. Not long after Baichuran left, Longqing charged into the room. Longqing couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when she saw the scene in the room. Fortunately, the situation hadn't developed to the worst because that bastard Baichuran didn't have any hands. However, Longqing was immediately enraged. She saw that Flower Fairy was only wearing a thin layer of underwear. Her long skirt had been torn to shreds by Baichuran. This bastard, I must kill him. Immediately, Qin Shuru and Gu Lingyao stood up and took out a new dress for Flower Fairy to wear. After getting dressed, Qin Shuru asked worriedly, "Are you okay?" Hearing Qin Shuru's words, Flower Fairy forced a smile and shook her head. "It's nothing." This was obviously 100 Flower Fairy's excuse. After experiencing such a thing, which woman would be fine? Especially someone like Flower Fairy, who was soft on the outside but strong on the inside. Although Baichuran didn't succeed today, he did see her body. Flower Fairy naturally couldn't pretend that nothing happened. Moreover, besides feeling sad, Flower Fairy didn't know how to face Xiaochen. Although this matter had nothing to do with Flower Fairy and she wasn't responsible for it, Flower Fairy was a woman who valued her chastity very much. As if reading Flower Fairy's mind, Gu Lingyao held Flower Fairy's arm and comforted her gently. "Sister, don't worry. Your husband will avenge you. Besides, this matter wasn't your fault. Your husband won't think too much about it." Xiaochen naturally wouldn't think too much about it. Before long, Qin Shuru and the other two girls walked out of the room accompanied by Longqing. At this moment, in the courtyard, the old man was talking to Baichuran. When he saw Qin Shuru and the other two girls walk out of the room, a complicated look flashed across the old man's eyes before he calmly spoke. "I already know what happened here. You all can go back first. Don't worry, I will definitely give you an explanation." He didn't mention anything about punishing Baichuran. Hearing this, Qin Shuru and the other two girls didn't say anything and left Baichuran's cave dwelling accompanied by Qianling and the others. As the Sacred Palace group left, the old man's face instantly darkened. He first looked at Baichuran, then turned to the four candidates. Under the old man's gaze, Baichuran's expression didn't change much, but the four candidates instantly paled. This matter was concealed, and the news was also sealed. One night passed. This night, Qianling and the others stayed in Flower Fairy's cave, and Flower Fairy and the other two did not sleep at all. On the morning of the second day, the old servant of Yinyangzi personally came to Flower Fairy's residence. After seeing Flower Fairy and the other two girls, the old man first comforted them and reprimanded them. Then, he went straight to the point and said with a serious expression, Ancestor, you already know what happened yesterday. Baichuran's actions are indeed worse than an animal's. However, after a night of interrogation and investigation, we found that it was not Baichuran's intention. She was deceived by someone. The 4 candidates deceived Baichuran and made her do such a thing. Now, the 4 of them have been locked up in Sunless Mountain. This is their punishment. Here are some compensation from the sect. Accept it. Sunless Mountain was a place specially built by the Yin and Yang sect to punish their disciples. There was no sunlight all year round and the Yin Qi was oppressive. The Yin Qi was like maggots that would constantly devour a person's flesh and spiritual energy. Although it wouldn't kill a person, it was definitely unbearable. The 4 candidates had been locked up in Sunless Mountain and were not allowed to leave for a year. This was their punishment. However, the true culprit, Baichuran, was completely fine. The old man did not mention her punishment at all. Gu Lingyao was the first to lose her temper. She asked the old man in dissatisfaction, "That can't be right. Baichuran is the mastermind. Why isn't she punished? I've already said that Baichuran was deceived. She has been locked up by the ancestor and is reflecting on her mistakes in her cave dwelling." Reflecting on her mistakes in her own cave dwelling? Gu Lingyao was furious. Are you lying to a 3-year-old? What kind of punishment is this? It's better to let Baichuran recuperate in her own cave dwelling. Just as Gu Lingyao was about to refute, Qin Shuru grabbed Gu Lingyao and shook his head at her, indicating that she didn't need to say anything more. Then he looked at the old man and said, "Thank you. Thank you very much, Patriarch Yin Yangzi. However, I don't think this matter is over yet. Our husbands should be arriving soon. Please add, vote, recommend." Chapter 1256. How could Qin Shuru not understand Yin Yangzi's decision to punish him? To put it bluntly, Yin Yangzi had no intention of severely punishing Baichuran. As Baichuran had said last night, he was one of the 2 chosen of the Taiyang sect. As such, how could Yin Yangzi really punish him severely? Even if Baichuran's hand had really been injured last night, Yin Yangzi would only minimize the problem. In fact, if he had to make a choice, Yin Yangzi might even abandon the Sacred Palace group and save Baichuran. This was what it meant by strength determined everything. Baichuran was a chosen on the saint rankings and was more important than the Sacred Palace group. As such, Yin Yangzi could only choose the lesser of 2 evils. As for the 4 prospective holy sons who were locked up in Sunless Mountain, it was just a symbolic punishment. At the same time, it could be said that they were scapegoats. She was no longer the ignorant girl from before. Therefore, Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls naturally understood the meaning behind this, including Gu Lingyao. However, the little girl had a straightforward personality and would speak her mind, unlike Baihua Fairy and Qin Shuru, who were able to keep things to themselves. As for the meaning behind Qin Shuru's words, it was actually very simple. Now that Xiaochen had returned safely, Yin Yangzi should also be aware of this matter. As such, once Xiaochen knew about this matter, given Xiaochen's temper, he would obviously not let it end peacefully. Since the Taiyang sect had chosen to protect Baichuran, the Sacred Palace could only seek justice in their own way. Moreover, this was also a reminder to Yin Yangzi that when the time came, Xiaochen and Baichuran would definitely only be able to choose one out of the 2. It would be impossible to choose both. Similarly, understanding Qin Shuru's meaning, the old man did not say anything. He nodded slightly and left. After the old man left, Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls also looked at the so-called compensation given by Yin Yangzi. One had to admit that Yin Yangzi was indeed generous. The pills and talismans were all extremely precious. It could be said that Yin Yangzi had given enough compensation this time. However, the 3 girls were not too interested in the compensation. After a casual glance, they put it away. Qin Shuru called Qin Yao over. "Madam," Qin Yao quickly walked into the hall and bowed to the 3 girls. Qin Shuru immediately said, "Qin Yao, make a trip to the Sacred Palace immediately and inform my husband of what happened here." Tell him to hurry to the Taiyang sect as soon as possible. He didn't intend to conceal this matter. After all, the matter wasn't over yet. Bai Qiuran hadn't received any punishment after this incident, and this had undoubtedly aided his arrogance. In this way, how could Bai Qiuran, who'd tasted the sweetness of victory, give up just like that? Therefore, the three girls wanted Xiaochen to hurry to the Taiyang sect as soon as possible before things got worse. Women had to learn to rely on men. It was not to say that women who relied on men were vases. This was different. For example, the three girls clearly did not have the means or ability to deal with Bai Qiuran. If they still chose to hide the truth from Xiaochen, they would truly be fools. If Bai Qiuran really succeeded, it would be too late for regrets. Qingyao nodded when she heard Qin Shuru's words. She then turned and hurried to the sacred palace. The Taiyang sect in the sacred palace had already constructed a teleportation formation, so it was not troublesome to travel between the two. She could reach the sacred palace on the same day from the Taiyang sect. While Qingyao was hurrying to the sacred palace, the old servant respectfully stood in front of Yinyangzi in his cave dwelling. He told Yinyangzi the details of his discussion with Qin Shuru and the other two girls. Yinyangzi smiled faintly. That little girl wants to tell me that I can only choose between Xiaochen and Bai Qiuran. Indeed. Regardless of what will happen to Xiaochen, Bai Qiuran will definitely not let Xiaochen go. Even if we want to protect him, we can't guarantee that nothing will go wrong unless Xiaochen never leaves the Taiyang sect. The old servant nodded in agreement. Whether it was Bai Qiuran or Xiaochen, the two of them were like fire and water. There was no way to reconcile them. Yinyangzi did not seem to care too much about the situation. He smiled and said, "Fine, let them fight among themselves. After all, this is a world where the strong survive. However, I'm curious about Xiaochen. Make the arrangements. If Xiaochen arrives at the Taiyang sect, immediately prepare for his talent test." Yes, but should we send someone to protect Xiaochen? After all, he's no match for Bai Qiuran right now. The old servant nodded, but then he asked if they should send someone to protect Xiaochen. Not for now. I want to see what Xiaochen's talent is like. Since Xiao Sheng and the others admire Xiaochen so much, I'd like to see if Xiaochen really is as heaven-defying as they say. If he's just ordinary trash, then let Bai Qiuran do as she pleases, Yinyangzi said indifferently. Yinyangzi did not plan to protect Xiaochen for now because he was not sure if Xiaochen had what it took to make him give up on Bai Qiuran. If he did not, then he could only give Xiaochen to Bai Qiuran to vent his anger. Yinyangzi's approach was very realistic, but also understandable. After all, the central world was a place where the strong preyed on the weak. After giving a few instructions, the old servant took his leave, and Yinyangzi closed his eyes to cultivate again. At the same time, the sacred palace. Qingyao didn't waste any time and quickly arrived at the sacred palace through the teleportation array. As soon as she arrived, she headed straight for the dustless sacred hall. In Xiaochen's cave dwelling, Qingyao saw Xiaochen. At this moment, Xiaochen was sparring with Princess Fingjue in the courtyard. Of course, it was more accurate to say that Princess Fingjue was giving Xiaochen pointers. Long Yang was lazily drinking wine at the side, while Tianyu was quietly watching from the side. Xiaochen and Princess Fingjue were exchanging blows in a special training field. But at this moment, Qingyao rushed in hurriedly. Sensing Qingyao's arrival, Xiaochen and Princess Fingjue stopped fighting at the same time. Xiaochen turned to Qingyao with a smile. "Qingyao, why are you here? Weren't you with Shui Rou and the others at the Heavenly Yin Extreme Yang sect?" "Young master, something happened." Qingyao didn't say much. She directly told Xiaochen what had happened at the Heavenly Yin Extreme Yang sect. After hearing Qingyao's story, the smile on Xiaochen's face disappeared. His eyes were filled with icy killing intent as he said coldly, "Bai Qiuran, you're courting death." He never thought that Qin Shuru and the others would encounter such a thing at the Heavenly Yin Extreme Yang sect. The 100-Flower Fairy, Green Bamboo, and Si Ju were almost killed by Bai Qiuran. Xiaochen's heart burned with anger. He turned to Tianyu and said, "Pack up. We're leaving for the Heavenly Yin Extreme Yang sect today." Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1257. The killing intent in his eyes had reached its peak. Tianyu nodded without saying anything after hearing Xiao Chen's question. Tianyu was also infuriated when she heard about what had happened to Qin Shuru and the other two girls in the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Having decided to rush to the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect overnight, Xiao Chen turned to look at Feng Ju and Long Yang and said indifferently, "Brother Long Yang, Princess Feng Ju, you've heard it too. I have to rush to the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect today. Please forgive me for not receiving you well. As for Brother Long Yang, you can wait in the Sacred Palace for a few days. I'll have my second sister come to the Sacred Palace to meet you." What had happened in the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect had caught Xiao Chen by surprise. At the same time, he was burning with rage. Naturally, he couldn't care about Long Yang and Feng Ju. Feng Ju shouted when she heard Xiao Chen's words. "Bai Churan? That aunt is really a beast." As a woman, Feng Ju was clearly infuriated by Bai Churan's actions. On the other hand, Long Yang continued to drink as he spoke indifferently. "It's fine. Feng Ju and I will accompany you. We have nothing to do anyway." Feng Ju naturally wouldn't refuse Long Yang's suggestion to go to the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect together. Seeing this, Xiao Chen didn't say anything. After all, with their identities, there was no danger in going to the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. At most, they would be expelled. Not in the mood to be entangled in these matters, Xiao Chen headed to Shaoqing and Bai Ruyue's residence and told them that he had to rush to the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect overnight. As for what had happened to Qin Shuru and the other two girls, Xiao Chen didn't say anything. After all, the two elders couldn't help much and would only worry them if he told them. Bai Ruyue was naturally reluctant to see Xiao Chen leave so suddenly, but Xiao Chen could only patiently persuade her. "Mother, don't worry. The Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect is connected to the Sacred Palace through a teleportation array. I will come back often. Also, if you need anything, you can send me a message." The teleportation array was indeed a lot more convenient. Bai Ruyue nodded reluctantly, but it was obvious that she still couldn't bear to part with Xiao Chen. On the other hand, Xiao Qing, who was at the side, spoke up at this time. "All right, Chinner has already grown up and is a married man. We don't have to be too worried. Our children and grandchildren will have their own fortune. Moreover, it's not a good idea to keep Chinner at home. A man has ambitions to travel far, so let him go." Xiao Chen's father, calm. How calm? After bidding farewell to his parents, Xiao Chen soon left the Holy Palace, ignoring Bai Ruyue's reluctance. He went to the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin through the teleportation formation. He didn't tell anyone about his trip. Only Tianyu, Qing Yao, Long Yang, and Feng Ju accompanied him. Although the Sacred Palace Saint Venerate in charge of guarding the teleportation array was puzzled by Xiao Chen's sudden trip to the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, he naturally didn't stop him. They easily arrived at the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect through the teleportation array. Inside the sect, Xiao Chen's group didn't encounter any obstructions because of Yin Yangzi's instructions. They smoothly arrived at 100 Flower Fairy's cave dwelling. Xiao Chen saw Chen Ling, Long Qing, Chen Yu, and the others in the cave dwelling. Of course, 100 Flower Fairy and the other two girls were also there. When Xiao Chen's figure appeared outside the cave dwelling, Qin Shuru and the other two girls, who were already waiting at the entrance, immediately ran towards Xiao Chen and rushed into Xiao Chen's arms. This was especially true for Gu Lingyao, who was clinging onto Xiao Chen and sobbing, "Why did you come back so late? We were all bullied by them." She was like a child who had been wronged outside and had come home to complain. Faced with Gu Lingyao's tearful complaints, Xiao Chen gently patted her on the back and said, all right, your husband is back now." Xiao Chen then looked towards 100 Flower Fairy. She lowered her head under Xiao Chen's gaze, not daring to meet Xiao Chen's eyes. In Flower Fairy's heart, she had always been brooding. After all, Baichuran had seen her body. Although Baichuran did not have the time to do anything about it, it had always been a knot in Flower Fairy's heart. Seeing through 100 Flower Fairy's thoughts, Xiaochen revealed a gentle smile and said, "Don't let your imagination run wild. One day, I will kill him with my own hands." Although he didn't say it explicitly, his words revealed Xiaochen's intentions. Hearing this, 100 Flower Fairy was stunned at first, but soon nodded with reddened eyes. Hugging Guling Yao, with Qin Shuru, 100 Flower Fairy, and Tianyu by his side, the group walked into the cave dwelling. Following behind Xiaochen, Long Yang and Feng Ju were obviously ignored by everyone. This wasn't intentional, but it was because everyone's attention was focused on Xiaochen. Of course, Long Yang didn't care about this. Following Xiaochen, Long Yang said with admiration and envy, "Brother Xiaochen is really a role model for my generation. I thought that Tianyu was already a fairy that descended to the moral world. To be able to have such a beauty in my life is already worth living. Who would have thought that he would have 3 beautiful wives? TSK, Brother Xiaochen really doesn't show off his true colors. What? You're so jealous. Do you want me to castrate you now? That way, you won't have to worry about finding other women." However, hearing this, Feng Ju said coldly. Long Yang, who was still indulging in his fantasies, suddenly heard Feng Ju's words. He felt a sudden tremble and unconsciously clamped his legs together as he laughed embarrassedly. No, I'm just joking. It's just a joke. You can't take it seriously." As the two of them spoke, they pulled away from Xiaochen and the others. When Long Yang and Feng Ju arrived at the hall, Xiaochen and the others had already taken their seats. At this moment, Long Qing said angrily, "Little brother, that Baichuran is too despicable. I must kill him." Long Qing's voice was very loud. His words could be heard from outside the hall. As soon as his voice fell, before Xiaochen could reply, everyone saw Long Yang swaggering with Feng Ju beside him. As for Long Yang, he said to Xiaochen with a playful smile, "I say, Brother Xiaochen, why don't I help you kill Baichuran?" As soon as he opened his mouth, Long Yang directly said that he wanted to kill Baichuran. Xiaochen didn't doubt this. Although he didn't know the exact ranking of Long Yang and Feng Ju on the saint ranking, based on Xiaochen's understanding of Long Yang, this guy was definitely not a person who would make irresponsible remarks. Since Long Yang said that he could kill Baichuran, he definitely could do it. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1258. Long Yang said he wanted to kill Baichuran as soon as he opened his mouth, as if Baichuran was an ant that he could easily crush. No one knew Long Yang's identity, so they all looked at him when they heard his words. When they saw his mischievous smile, everyone's gaze fell on Xiaochen. Clearly, they were asking about Long Yang and Feng Ju's identities. Under everyone's gazes, Xiaochen stood up and strode over to Long Yang. He smiled and introduced them to everyone present. "These two are my friends. It's all thanks to them that I was able to return safely. Long Yang, Feng Ju, they're both chosen on the saint rankings. Holy sons and holy daughters on the saint rankings?" In the beginning, no one paid too much attention when they heard Xiaochen say that Long Yang and Feng Ju were their saviors, but when they heard that they were both chosen on the saint rankings, their eyes clearly changed. Chosen on the saint rankings. Everyone was no stranger to these 4 words. Wasn't Baichuran chosen on the saint rankings? He alone was enough to suppress everyone from the sacred palace. Moreover, Baichuran's ranking on the saint rankings wasn't high. He was only ranked 93rd, the last on the saint rankings. Even so, Baichuran still had the ability to suppress everyone. This wasn't because Baichuran had absorbed the power of the Taiyang sect, but because his own strength alone was enough to give everyone a headache. To be honest, even if Chenling, Long Qing, and Qinyu joined forces, they would only be able to contend against Baichuran for a while. It was almost impossible for them to win. Of course, this didn't mean that their talent was inferior to Baichuran's, but because of the cultivation environment they grew up in. one had to admit that the cultivation environment of the Central World was far superior to that of the North Star realm. Thus, with such a difference, even if two people had the same natural talent, there would definitely be a difference in their final achievements. This was the so-called illusory realm changing a person. However, as long as Chen-Ling and the others were given enough time, they would definitely be able to catch up to Baichuran. Facing the gazes of the crowd, Long Yang did not back down. The smile on his face did not change at all. On the other hand, Feng Zhu's face was indifferent. It was as if he did not want to talk to the crowd. Of course, this was Feng Zhu's character. He did not have any intention of looking down on them. After the introductions, Long Yang and Feng Zhu took their seats. Xiaochen smiled at Long Yang and said, "Brother Long Yang, I will personally behead Baichuran." Although Xiaochen believed that Long Yang was strong enough to kill Baichuran, he didn't plan on asking him for help. Firstly, Baichuran had to be killed by him personally. Secondly, even though Long Yang had a noble status, if he really killed Baichuran, the Taiyang sect wouldn't let the matter rest. Even if he couldn't kill Long Yang, he could imprison him. Long Yang didn't say anything else when he heard Xiaochen. Xiaochen turned to look at the crowd. "Big brother, second sister, senior brothers and junior sisters, don't act rashly for now. I will deal with it. Everyone should cultivate during this period of time. There's no need to take the initiative to offend Baichuran." Xiaochen actually had a rough plan to deal with Baichuran. If he wanted to kill Baichuran, Xiaochen had to be at the perfection of the Dao Emperor realm at the very least. Moreover, he had to display sufficient talent to make the Taiyang sect feel that he had more potential than Baichuran. Only then would the Taiyang sect give up on protecting and favoring Baichuran. Otherwise, not to mention whether Xiaochen could kill Baichuran with the Taiyang sect's protection, how would he face the Taiyang sect even if he could kill Baichuran? At that time, even the sacred palace would be implicated. This matter couldn't be rushed. Everyone nodded in agreement when they heard Xiaochen's words. After that, they stopped worrying about Baichuran and started chatting instead. Of course, most of them were asking about Xiaochen during this period of time. They were naturally worried that Xiaochen had been able to safely return to the human territory after being missing for a few months. In response to their questions, Xiaochen gave them a simple explanation of what had happened. They chatted until late at night. After drinking together, they dispersed. Long Yang and Feng Zhu naturally stayed in 100 Flower Fairy's dwelling. After all, they didn't have a place to stay. Of course, Long Qing was also asked to stay by Xiaochen. He didn't forget his promise to Long Yang and introduced Long Qing to Long Yang. After that, Xiaochen no longer cared about the two's discussion and turned to accompany Qin Shuru and the other three girls. Sitting in the courtyard, Long Yang looked at Long Qing in front of him with a hint of doubt in his eyes. Judging from her aura, Long Qing was definitely a pure-blooded dragon, and her bloodline power wasn't inferior to his at all. A pure-blooded dragon with such a bloodline power could only be from the Dragon Emperor's bloodline like him. However, Long Yang didn't remember Long Qing from the Dragon Emperor's bloodline. Were you really born in the North Star realm?" It was impossible for a pure-blooded dragon to be born in the North Star realm, so Long Yang tried to test the waters. Hearing this, Long Qing said expressionlessly, "That's right. I'm in a bad mood right now, so I don't want to discuss this with you. If you have time, we can talk about it another day." After admitting that she was indeed born in the North Star realm, Long Qing said indifferently. She didn't give Long Yang any face at all. After saying that, she got up and left. Looking at Long Qing's back, Long Yang didn't stop her. He sank into deep thought and muttered softly, "This can't be. A descendant of the Dragon Emperor's bloodline can't be born in the North Star realm. That's impossible. Also, if that's the case, this Long Qing is my younger sister, or elder sister." He was a little confused, but Long Qing didn't want to talk at all, so there was nothing Long Yang could do. The next morning, Xiaochen woke up early as usual. Originally, Xiaochen didn't want to make trouble for Baichuran so soon, because Xiaochen knew that even if he went to find him now, he wouldn't get anything out of it. If he wanted to find him, he would have to kill him in one blow. As for Baichuran, Xiaochen wouldn't give him a chance to turn things around. However, Xiaochen didn't take the initiative to find Baichuran, but Baichuran took the initiative to come. After learning that Xiaochen had returned to the human territory last night and had come to the Taiyang sect, Baichuran took the initiative to visit early in the morning. She was very arrogant and directly injured Siju. Siju tried to stop Baichuran, but Baichuran didn't say anything and directly injured Siju. Of course, the injury wasn't serious, and Baichuran didn't kill her. However, this movement quickly attracted the attention of Xiaochen and the others. Walking quickly to the front yard, Xiaochen saw the arrogant Baichuran at a glance. Please add me to your collection, monthly vote, recommend me. Chapter 1259. Although it was his first time meeting Baichuran, Xiaochen recognized her at a glance. Similarly, Baichuran recognized Xiaochen at a glance as well. The two of them looked at each other. Qinshuru and the other two girls besides Xiaochen all had cold expressions on their faces. Green Bamboo hurriedly went forward to help Siju up and fed her a healing pill. Compared to the cold expressions of the other girls, Xiaochen's expression was extremely calm, without any hint of sadness or joy. At that moment, Baichuran was the first to speak. "You're Xiaochen." She spoke in an indifferent and contemptuous tone as if she didn't care about Xiaochen at all. However, Xiaochen didn't show any signs of anger. Instead, he smiled coldly. "You're that lustful, Baichuran?" Baichuran didn't answer but asked the question instead. His words were sharp. Baichuran's expression suddenly froze when she heard Xiaochen's words. Killing intent rapidly gathered in her eyes. Baichuran had heard that Xiaochen had come to the Tianyin Taiyang sect last night, so she personally came early in the morning. Of course, Baichuran didn't want to kill Xiaochen because it was simply impossible, especially in the Tianyin Taiyang sect. Everyone knew that Yin Yangzi was deliberately taking care of the sacred palace people. Under such circumstances, Baichuran obviously couldn't kill Xiaochen. However, although she couldn't kill Xiaochen directly, beating him up wasn't a problem at all. In addition, Xiaochen's words were so sharp that Baichuran was secretly furious. For a moment, Baichuran decided to teach Xiaochen a lesson in front of all the girls present. She wanted them to see with their own eyes that the man they had chosen was nothing more than an ant in front of Baichuran. With that thought, a faint fluctuation of spirit energy emerged from Baichuran's body. The girls' expressions darkened when they sensed the fluctuation of spirit energy, but Xiaochen remained as calm as ever. Xiaochen knew very well what Baichuran was up to when she came here early in the morning. She just wanted to ridicule him in front of all the girls. However, he was overthinking things. Yes, Xiaochen's current strength was indeed inferior to Baichuran's, but one shouldn't forget that Xiaochen and the girls weren't the only ones in the cave abode. She didn't panic at all. Just as Baichuran was about to attack, a lazy voice sounded from outside the courtyard. "Baichuran, are you sure you want to fight?" Long Yang and Feng Ju walked into the front yard with large strides. Seeing the two of them, Baichuran, who had been ready to kill Xiaochen and Feng Ju, instantly changed her expression to one of fear. She stared at Long Yang and Feng Ju, who were slowly walking toward Xiaochen, and exclaimed in surprise. "Long Yang, Feng Ju! Why are you in my heavenly Yin Taiyang sect?" As a chosen on the saint ranking, Baichuran naturally recognized Long Yang and Feng Ju. However, the gap between them was too big. Long Yang and Feng Ju were powerful existences on the saint ranking, while Baichuran was ranked last. The gap between them was huge. If Long Yang and Feng Ju were in the first and second echelon of the saint ranking, then Baichuran was in the fourth and fifth echelon. Baichuran was extremely shocked. She didn't expect Long Yang and Feng Ju to appear here in the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. However, Long Yang smiled faintly in the face of Baichuran's shock. "Baichuran, brother Xiaochen is my best friend." "Why? Do you want to fight him?" Both of them were chosen on the saint ranking, but Long Yang's attitude towards Bai Qiuran was very casual and even had a trace of contempt. Bai Qiuran was slightly angry, but there was nothing she could do. She naturally didn't dare to fight Long Yang. This guy was a freak ranked third on the Saint ranking. Bai Qiuran couldn't summon the slightest intention to fight Long Yang. Not knowing how to answer, Bai Qiuran simply chose to remain silent. The development of the situation was completely out of her expectations. Seeing Bai Qiuran remain silent, Long Yang didn't mind and continued to smile. Scram. I don't want to fight. Originally, Long Yang could totally beat Bai Qiuran up, but after thinking about it, he decided against it. After all, Xiaochen had clearly stated that Bai Qiuran's matter had to be resolved by Xiaochen personally. Therefore, Long Yang gave up on the idea of fighting. Upon hearing Long Yang's words, Bai Qiuran's face darkened and she glared fiercely at Xiaochen. She never thought that Xiaochen would actually know Long Yang and Fengju. Moreover, under normal circumstances, the fights between Chosen on the Saint ranking wouldn't involve the factions behind them. Firstly, the Chosen on the Saint ranking had the protection of the will of the Heavenly Way. Secondly, to become a Chosen on the Saint ranking, who didn't have a backer? Therefore, Bai Qiuran could only suffer for nothing when facing Long Yang today. The Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect definitely wouldn't stand up for him because Long Yang and Fengju were also Chosen on the Saint ranking. Xiaochen, I don't believe that Long Yang and Fengju can stay in the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect forever. Humph. Bai Qiuran thought viciously in his heart, then turned and left without another word. After Bai Qiuran left, Fengju said indifferently, Xiaochen, why didn't you just let Long Yang beat him up first? This guy really deserves a beating. Fengju could understand why Xiaochen wanted to kill Bai Qiuran personally. However, in the situation just now, Long Yang could have beaten Bai Qiuran to vent his anger, but Xiaochen didn't agree. Upon hearing Fengju's words, Xiaochen smiled faintly and said, Why? Don't you have confidence in me? Don't worry, it won't be long before I personally deal with him. Xiaochen didn't care too much about Bai Qiuran's arrival. Right now, Xiaochen was most concerned about how he could quickly integrate into the Heavenly Yin and Taiyang sect and make Yin Yangzi value him. Only then would he have a chance of killing Bai Qiuran. Otherwise, with Yin Yangzi's protection, he definitely wouldn't be able to do anything to Bai Qiuran. At the same time that Bai Qiuran left in a huff, in Yin Yangzi's cave residence, the old servant respectfully reported to Yin Yangzi about Xiaochen. After hearing the old servant's report, Yin Yangzi nodded slightly and said, You can get ready. Prepare for Xiaochen's talent test today, but don't make it a big deal. Just keep it a secret. When the time comes, I will personally go and take a look. Today was the day to prepare for Xiaochen's talent test. Hearing this, the old servant respectfully nodded and replied, Yes. With that, the old servant left. At this moment, Yin Yangzi muttered thoughtfully, Sigh, a mountain can't have two tigers. However, Xiaochen, do you really have the ability to make this old man willingly give up on Bai Qiuran? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1260. Yin Yangzi actually had a headache about the matter between Xiaochen and Bai Qiuran. If the two of them could get along peacefully, it would definitely be the best outcome for the Taiyang sect. Unfortunately, that was no longer possible. Wanting Xiaochen and Bai Qiuran to get along peacefully was simply a fool's dream. Yin Yangzi was not a 3-year-old child, so he naturally understood this principle. He had never thought of making the two of them bury the hatchet because it was impossible. Since they couldn't get along peacefully, they could only choose between the two. As for the standard of choice, it would depend on Xiaochen's talent. To put it bluntly, if Yin Yangzi wanted to choose Xiaochen, then Xiaochen's talent had to be higher than Bai Qiuran's. That was the only possibility. After all, in terms of current strength, Xiaochen was definitely inferior to Bai Qiuran. Then, they could only rely on talent and future. Yin Yangzi had to feel that Xiaochen's future achievements would definitely surpass Bai Qiuran's. Only then would Yin Yangzi favor Xiaochen. Of course, it wasn't easy to surpass Bai Qiuran's talent. As a chosen on the saint rankings, Bai Qiuran's talent had already reached 98 meters. In that case, Xiaochen would have to reach at least 99 meters. In other words, he would have to be on the same level as Long Yang and the other top 3 chosen on the saint rankings. Only then would Yin Yangzi favor him. If Xiaochen's talent was inferior to Bai Qiuran's after the test, or even if Xiaochen's talent was the same as Bai Qiuran's, Yin Yangzi would probably choose Bai Qiuran without hesitation. After all, if the two of them had the same talent and Bai Qiuran was stronger than Xiaochen, then it was needless to say who would choose. Therefore, in this talent test, Xiaochen's talent had to surpass Bai Qiuran's. Only then would Yin Yangzi favor him. Xiaochen had already expected this. At this moment, Yin Yangzi's old servant had personally come to inform him of the talent test in Guling Yao's dwelling. Xiaochen had already heard about the talent test from the 3 women, so Xiaochen wasn't surprised by the old servant's arrival. According to Yin Yangzi, the talent test for Xiaochen would be conducted in Guling Yao's dwelling without alerting too many people. At the same time, even Long Yang and Feng Zhu were asked to leave. They were not allowed to watch from the side. Yin Yangzi didn't seem to want to expose Xiaochen's talent, so Long Yang and Feng Zhu left as instructed. Although the two of them were chosen on the saint rankings and the experts of the Taiyang sect didn't dare to attack them, they still had to abide by the rules. After dismissing the irrelevant people, Xiaochen, Tianyu, Qin Shuru, and Yin Yangzi's old servant soon arrived at a mountain peak at the edge of Guling Yao's dwelling. They prepared to take the talent test. At the beginning, Tianyu was the one to take the test. Tianyu hadn't tested her talent before, so the old servant was extremely surprised by the result. Tianyu was 98 meters tall, the same as Bai Qiuran, Chen Ling, Long Qing, and Qin Yu. After the test, the old servant took a deep look at Tianyu. He didn't expect another 98 meters tall person to appear. But surprise aside, the most important thing today was still Xiaochen's talent test. According to Xiaosheng and the others, Xiaochen was the most talented person in the sacred palace, then Xiaochen's talent might very well exceed 99 meters. A 99-meter tall talent, what kind of concept was that? It had been a long time since a 99-meter tall person had appeared in the human race. His heart was filled with anticipation. Because of this, when Xiaochen walked toward the talent testing stone, the old servant beside Yin Yangzi also became extremely serious. At the same time, no one noticed that Yin Yangzi was also hiding in the void above everyone's head, silently watching everything. Xiaochen began the test. On the other side, in a garden not far from here, Long Yang and Feng Zhu weren't allowed to watch Xiaochen's talent test. At this moment, Long Yang was idly drinking wine while Feng Zhu sat beside him with an unhappy expression. Clearly, Feng Zhu was angry because he was refused to watch Xiaochen's talent test. Seeing this, Long Yang took a sip of wine and said, "All right, what's there to be angry about? It's just a small matter." Long Yang chuckled when he saw Feng Zhu's unhappy expression. Hearing this, Feng Zhu turned to look at Long Yang and asked, "What level do you think Xiaochen's talent will reach?" "At least the same level as Bai Qiuran. It's even possible that he might reach my level." Hearing Feng Zhu's words, Long Yang took a sip of wine and said with a smile. Long Yang's words were very casual, but Feng Zhu was shocked when he heard it. What did it mean to reach Long Yang's level? One had to know that there were only 2 people in the central world who could compare with Long Yang's talent. But now, Long Yang was saying that Xiaochen's talent might not be weaker than his. Shock flashed in Feng Zhu's eyes. Seeing this, Long Yang smiled faintly and said, "What, you don't believe me?" His evaluation of Xiaochen was very high, but Feng Zhu really didn't dare to believe it. After all, a 99-meter tall talent was absolutely terrifying. While the two were chatting with each other, Xiaochen was already sitting on the talent testing stone on the mountain peak in the distance. At the same time, a spiritual energy vortex began to form above Xiaochen's head. It could be said that there was almost no obstruction. Xiao Chen's spiritual energy vortex rushed to the 98-meter level in one fell swoop, and at this time, the spiritual energy vortex was still growing and had no intention of stopping. Looking at the spiritual energy vortex that was growing and approaching the 99-meter level, everyone was extremely nervous. Everyone was looking forward to whether Xiao Chen's talent could reach the 99-meter level. Under everyone's gaze, Xiao Chen's talent successfully broke through the 99-meter mark, and it only stopped when it was almost 100 meters. A 99-meter talent. Facing such a result, Qin Shiru and the other two girls looked at each other and smiled. The old servant next to Yin Yangzi was stunned on the spot as if he had entered a meditative state. As a half-step great saint, this old servant's vision was definitely very high, but even so, he was still shocked by the scene in front of him. 99 meters, this was 99 meters. Among the human clan, only Xiao Chen's talent had reached the 99-meter level. The other human clan saints were all at the 98-meter level. It could be said that Xiao Chen, who had a 99-meter talent, already had the potential to stand at the top of the central world. Not only the old servant, but Yin Yangzi, who was hidden in the void, also had a dull expression on her face at this time. Excitement, and joy constantly flashed in her eyes. Request collection, request monthly votes, request recommendation. Chapter 1261. His talent had really reached 99 meters. Everyone present was shocked by this result. It wasn't until the spirit chi vortex above Xiao Chen's head slowly disappeared and Xiao Chen walked out of the talent testing stone that the old servant beside Yin Yangzi recovered from his shock. It was no wonder that the old servant was so shocked. What did a genius with a talent of 99 meters represent? One had to know that among the 100 races in the central world, there were only 3 races with a talent of 99 meters. Now, the human race also had such a peerless prodigy. The old servant took a deep look at Xiao Chen, not knowing what to say. It was at this moment that Yin Yangzi suddenly appeared. Yin Yangzi was originally hidden in the void, but after witnessing Xiao Chen's talent with his own eyes, Yin Yangzi finally decided to show himself and meet Xiao Chen. With such talent, Xiao Chen was enough for Yin Yangzi to pay attention to. His hair, which was half black and half white, was extremely eye-catching. As Yin Yangzi appeared, the old servant was the first to bow. Then, Xiao Chen, Qin Shiru, and the other 2 girls followed suit. Yin Yangzi didn't react to everyone's greetings. He looked at Xiao Chen and said indifferently, "Everyone, you may leave now. You guys can leave now. I want to talk to Xiao Chen alone." He signaled the old servant, Qin Shiru, and the other 3 women to withdraw first. Hearing this, no one said anything. After all, as a great holy emperor, no one in the heavenly Yin-Yang sect could disobey Yin Yangzi's words. Everyone left, and soon, only Yin Yangzi and Xiao Chen were left on the mountain peak. This wasn't the first time he had seen Yin Yangzi, but the first time was when the sacred palace was attacked by the Ghost King sect. At that time, Xiao Chen only glanced at Yin Yangzi from afar, and the two didn't communicate much. Later, because of the spatial turbulence, Xiao Chen naturally didn't have the chance to come in contact with Yin Yangzi. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't nervous when facing the great sage so close for the first time. However, without giving Xiao Chen much time to think, Yin Yangzi had already arrived beside Xiao Sheng and said indifferently, "Is there really no other choice about the matter with Bai Qiuran?" He didn't expect Yin Yangzi to bring up this matter as soon as he spoke. Clearly, the talent that Xiao Chen had displayed had changed Yin Yangzi's mind. A talent of 99 meters was enough for Yin Yangzi to value Xiao Chen. Moreover, if Yin Yangzi really had to choose between Xiao Chen and Bai Qiuran, then Yin Yangzi would probably choose Xiao Chen. The reason was very simple. Although Xiao Chen's current cultivation and strength were inferior to Bai Qiuran's, in terms of talent and potential, Bai Qiuran couldn't catch up to Xiao Chen. The difference of 1 meter between 98 and 99 meters was not to be underestimated. At this level, a difference of 1 meter was the difference between heaven and earth. Even though Baichuran was now a chosen on the saint rankings, with his talent, entering the top 50 of the saint rankings was already his limit. However, Xiaochen was different. With a talent of 99 meters, Xiaochen had hope of reaching the top 3 of the saint rankings. In other words, Xiaochen had the qualifications to reach the top 3 of the saint rankings. Because of this, because Xiaochen had greater potential, Yinyangzi was now more inclined towards Xiaochen. As long as Xiaochen wasn't a chosen, his future achievements would definitely surpass Baichuran's and help the Heavenly Yin Sun sect and the entire human race more than Baichuran. However, even though he was already biased, Yinyangzi still couldn't help but ask at the last moment. It would naturally be best if Xiaochen and Baichuran could bury the hatchet. Unfortunately, in response to his question, Xiaochen only replied calmly, "If I don't kill Baichuran in this life, I, Xiaochen, swear that I'm not human." Xiaochen didn't directly answer Yinyangzi's question, but his words made his intentions clear. Between him and Baichuran, only one could live. Xiaochen naturally couldn't let Baichuran live after doing such a thing to Baihua Fairy because this had crossed Xiaochen's bottom line. Yinyangzi wasn't surprised at all when he heard Xiaochen's words. He had already expected all of this. He had only asked this because he wanted to try again. Perhaps there would be a miracle. It was impossible for Xiaochen and Baichuran to coexist. Yinyangzi understood and didn't continue on this topic. Yinyangzi continued. "In that case, what do you want me to do?" Yinyangzi's words were very straightforward. He also wanted to rope in Xiaochen. A person with a 99-meter talent was enough for Yinyangzi to rope in. Moreover, Yinyangzi didn't want Xiaochen to hold any grudges against the Taiyang sect because of Baichuran. Xiaochen naturally understood what Yinyangzi meant. In fact, Xiaochen didn't have any complaints about Yinyangzi. This wasn't because of his identity as the great sage, but because of the care Yinyangzi had shown the sacred palace people during this period. Think about it, without Yinyangzi's care, the situation would have only become more serious. It was also because of Yinyangzi that Baichuran had many concerns when she acted, which allowed the sacred palace people to be safe. Xiaochen was very grateful to Yinyangzi. Therefore, after hearing Yinyangzi's words, Xiaochen didn't think too much and cupped his hands. "Patriarch, there's no need to do anything. This is a matter between me and Baichuran. It should be resolved by us." There was no need for Yinyangzi to do anything. If he needed external help to deal with Baichuran, Xiaochen would have agreed when Wang Yang suggested he do it. Yinyangzi nodded in satisfaction when he heard Xiaochen's answer. Xiaochen's performance had left a good impression on Yinyangzi. If Xiaochen had asked him to punish Baichuran, Yinyangzi wouldn't have said anything, but his impression of Xiaochen would definitely have dropped. However, Xiaochen didn't do so, which surprised Yinyangzi a little. He nodded slightly. Yinyangzi said, "You're still not on the Saint Sage list. You're still not a chosen on the hallowed rankings, so you can only be a prospective chosen of my heavenly Yin-Yang sect for now. However, with your talent, it won't be long before you make it onto the hallowed rankings. You should focus on your cultivation during this period of time. If there's anything else, wait until you make it onto the hallowed rankings." Since Xiaochen didn't need him to do anything, Yinyangzi naturally wouldn't force him. At the same time, he told Xiaochen that with his current situation, successfully making it onto the Saint Sage list was his top priority. Everything else could be set aside for now. Xiaochen clasped his hands respectfully when he heard Yinyangzi's words. "I will remember your teachings, Patriarch. All right, get ready. The heavenly Yin Valley is about to open. This time, you will enter together. This is a cultivation treasure ground for our heavenly Yin-Yang sect. I believe it will be of great help to you," Yinyangzi said. "Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1262. The opening of the Heavenly Yin Valley was definitely a major event for the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect. Countless disciples would fight for a spot to enter the Heavenly Yin Valley. However, Yinyangzi had given such a precious spot to Xiaochen so easily. Logically speaking, Xiaochen did not have the qualifications to enter the heavenly Yin Valley. However, since Yinyanzi had spoken, there was naturally no problem. From this, it could be seen how much importance Yinyanzi attached to Xiaochen. This was normal. After all, Xiaochen's talent was there for all to see. With such a peerless genius, Yinyanzi would be stupid if he did not put an effort to nurture him. Xiaochen still did not know how precious the spot to enter the heavenly Yin Valley was, so he did not feel anything when he heard Yinyanzi's words. Seeing that Xiaochen nodded in agreement, Yinyanzi continued. Also, since you insist on resolving the matter with Baichuran yourself, there's nothing much I can say. However, there's something I have to remind you of. Talent is talent, but you have to be careful before talent turns into strength. You mustn't do anything brainless. After all, no matter how talented a dead person is, it's not worth mentioning. Yinyanzi took the initiative to remind him. As soon as this sentence came out, it further proved Yinyanzi's choice. Of course, Xiaochen could only say that Yinyanzi was overthinking. Xiaochen had never been a flower that grew up in a greenhouse. Xiaochen understood this logic even without Yinyanzi's reminder. Talent was talent, strength was strength. These were two different things. Xiaochen knew very well that he was no match for Baichuran now, so he had never thought of taking revenge on Baichuran now. Of course, Xiaochen also firmly believed that it would not be long before he could catch up to Baichuran. Baichuran would be the best stepping stone for him to climb onto the saint leaderboard and become a saint. Xiaochen wanted to use Baichuran's life to establish his position on the saint leaderboard. However, before that, he could collect some interest. Since Yinyanzi was also here, Xiaochen took the opportunity to speak. Patriarch, I have a presumptuous request. You want to enter the Sunless Mountain? As soon as Xiaochen finished speaking, Yinyanzi already knew what he wanted to say. Xiaochen wanted to enter Mount Sunless and kill the 4 prospective sons. After all, the 4 prospective sons were also involved in the incident that night. Moreover, Sea Ju and Green Bamboo were taken away by the 4 of them. Therefore, the 4 of them deserved to die. Xiaochen's patriarchs, after all, the 4 prospective saints of the Taiyang sect. After all, the 4 prospective saints. Hearing that Yinyanzi directly exposed his thoughts, Xiaochen did not hide it and nodded solemnly. Patriarch, these 4 people have evil intentions and deserve to be killed. But they are all prospective saints of the Taiyang sect. The loss will be the strength of the Taiyang sect, Yinyanzi said indifferently. These words sounded like a refusal, but after a slight pause, Yinyanzi continued. Forget it. You can enter the Sunless Mountain with this token. Yinyanzi unexpectedly agreed and casually threw a black token to Xiaochen. Before Xiaochen could reply, Yinyanzi's figure disappeared. At the same time, a faint sigh was transmitted to Xiaochen's ears. Xiaochen, I hope you won't disappoint me. Yinyanzi's action clearly meant that he had given up on the 4 prospective saints and allowed Xiaochen to enter the Sunless Mountain. There was no need to think about the result. The 4 prospective saints would undoubtedly die. However, this was normal when he thought about it. For Xiaochen, he could even give up Baichuran and Yinyanzi, let alone the 4 prospective saints. Yinyanzi's actions were not because he was too black-bellied and had no feelings for his disciples. It couldn't be helped. In any place, strength was everything. People without value could only be reduced to cannon fodder or sacrificed. Xiaochen had already shown his value, so Yinyanzi chose Xiaochen. It was a very simple reason. Here, if he could use the lives of the 4 prospective saints in exchange for a sense of belonging to the Taiyang sect, it would definitely be a profitable deal. Among the Sacred Palace disciples, in addition to Xiaochen, a peerless heaven pride with a talent of 99 meters, there were also Chenling, Longqing, Qinyu, Tianyu and other heaven prides with talents of 95 meters and above. It could be said that the potential of the Sacred Palace disciples was far greater than that of the 4 prospective saints. Sacrificing them in exchange for the Sacred Palace disciples was the best choice for Yinyanzi. As the patriarch of a sect, every decision Inyanzi made could only be made with the sect as the prerequisite. As long as it was beneficial to the sect, Inyanzi had no reason to refuse. This was also why Inyanzi agreed. It had to be said that Inyanzi's choice was indeed correct, and the answer would be revealed in the future. After this short conversation with Inyanzi, Xiaochen was even more grateful to Inyanzi. Although he knew that Inyanzi was only doing this because of his talent, it had to be said that Inyanzi's actions had made Xiaochen acknowledge the Taiyang sect. After putting away the token, Xiaochen quickly returned to Hundred Flower Fairy's residence. When Xiaochen appeared, Hundred Flower Fairy, Qin Shuru, Guling Yao, Tianyu, Long Yang, Feng Ju and the others were sitting in a circle in the courtyard. Upon seeing Xiaochen's return, Long Yang smiled and said to Feng Ju, "Oh, Feng Ju, didn't you want to know brother Xiaochen's talent? Ask him yourself." Feng Ju really wanted to know Xiaochen's talent, but after being teased by Long Yang, Feng Ju rolled his eyes at Long Yang. In the end, he couldn't help but ask about Xiaochen's talent. Xiaochen naturally had no intention of hiding anything from Long Yang and Feng Ju, so he smiled and said, 99 meters. Xiaochen said it casually, but after hearing this, Feng Ju's expression changed and he was instantly stunned. It's really 99 meters. Xiaochen didn't know much about the talent of 99 meters. Although he knew that such a talent should be very high, he didn't know that it would be this high. In the entire central world, the number of people who could reach 99 meters was less than 5. And now, Xiaochen was added to the list. It's really 99 meters. Feng Ju thought in shock. Compared to Feng Ju's shock, Long Yang was much calmer. He continued to drink his wine unhurriedly with a faint smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. At the same time, he thought to himself, this is interesting. I wonder what those two guys will do if they know about this. I'm afraid they will personally come to the human territory. The two people that Long Yang thought of were none other than the two people who were in the top 3 of the holy rankings. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1263. In fact, there wasn't much difference in strength between the 3 of them. Although Long Yang was ranked 3rd, the 2 people ahead of him didn't dare to say that they could defeat Long Yang. In fact, the 3 of them were almost on par with each other. They might be able to defeat Long Yang by 1 or 2 moves, but there wouldn't be a big gap between them. Moreover, it was hard to say who would win if they were to fight to the death. Therefore, the top 3 of the holy rankings were actually on the same level. There was no such thing as the first place being stronger than the second or third place. Long Yang couldn't help but look forward to what would happen if the other 2 found out that Xiaochen's talent had also reached 99 meters. Given their personalities, they would probably do anything. Perhaps that was why Inyanzi wanted to keep it a secret. After all, Xiaochen hadn't really matured yet. It wouldn't be a good thing to expose his talent too early. Although the Yin and Yang sects could protect Xiaochen, it would be troublesome if the holy rankings were involved. After all, the holy rankings were special existences in the central world. They were practically above the 100 races. Take Long Yang and Feng Ju as an example. The 2 of them could move freely in the human territory, but the human experts didn't dare to attack them. Xiaochen and Long Yang had a lot to drink. Xiaochen also told everyone that he was going to Sunless Mountain. Everyone naturally knew why Xiaochen was going to Sunless Mountain. However, Qin Shuru and the other 3 women were worried. Husband, those 4 guys are shameless, but they aren't weak. You're going alone, don't worry, I won't go alone. Si Ju, go inform big brother, second sister, and senior brother Qinyu that they'll go with me to Sunless Mountain tomorrow. Xiaochen smiled in response to the 4 women's worry. Of course, he couldn't go alone. Although Xiaochen was confident in his own strength, he wasn't stupid. With his current strength, he might be stronger than the 4 prospective holy sons. However, it was still impossible for him to fight the 4 of them alone. After all, any one of the prospective holy sons of the Yin and Yang sects possessed the strength of a holy sun in the North Star boundary. Therefore, from the very beginning, Xiaochen had already planned to bring Chenling, Long Qing, and Qin Yu on this trip. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Qin Shiru and the other two girls were relieved. With Chenling and the other two, there shouldn't be any problems. However, at this time, Long Yang spoke. Sunless Mountain, the place where the heavenly Yin-Yang sect imprisons disciples who have broken the sect's rules. Brother Xiaochen, Feng Ju and I will go with you tomorrow. It just so happens that I am very curious about this Sunless Mountain. Long Yang's character had always been lively. Now that he heard that Xiaochen was going to Sunless Mountain, how could he miss it? Hearing Long Yang's words and seeing his playful face, Xiaochen finally nodded his head in agreement. It wasn't a big deal to bring Long Yang and Feng Ju. After all, Sunless Mountain was just a dungeon of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. Moreover, the people who were in prison were all disciples who had broken the sect's rules. There were no secrets to speak of. Therefore, even if he brought Long Yang and Feng Ju, Yinyangzi wouldn't say anything. Of course, if he brought them to the heavenly Yin Valley, it would be a different story. Yinyangzi would never agree. According to Xiaochen's instructions, Siju also informed Chenling and the others as soon as possible. After learning about this matter, Chenling and the others didn't refuse. Moreover, with their temperament, they naturally figured out the whole matter very quickly. Since Xiaochen could enter Sunless Mountain, Yinyangzi must have agreed. Since Yinyangzi had agreed, it meant that between Xiaochen and Baichuran, Yinyangzi had chosen Xiaochen. This was naturally good news for the people of the Sacred Palace. After a silent night, early the next morning, Chenling, Long Qing, Qin Yu, and even the Qing Emperor and the others gathered in Guling Yao's cave dwelling. At the same time, the higher-ups of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect officially announced that Xiaochen had become the prospective chosen of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. Another prospective chosen had suddenly appeared. It seemed that ever since the people of the Sacred Palace joined the heavenly Yin-Yang sect, there had been an endless stream of new prospective chosen. However, Xiaochen didn't care at all about becoming the prospective chosen of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. In Xiaochen's opinion, becoming a prospective chosen was a completely insignificant matter. The only thing Xiaochen had his eyes on now was the chosen of the saint ranking. As for the prospective chosen, to put it bluntly, although they had a high status in the heavenly Yin-Yang sect, no one cared about them outside. Only the chosen of the saint ranking was recognized by the entire central world. Of course, this could only be attributed to Xiaochen's high standards. But thinking about it, he was already the first chosen in the North Star boundary. Why would Xiaochen care about the identity of a prospective chosen in the central world? Paying no attention to what was happening outside, Xiaochen and the others sat in the main hall of the 100-Flower Fairy's cave dwelling. The Qing Emperor and the others had expressed their willingness to go with Xiaochen and the others to enter the Sunless Mountain today, but Xiaochen had refused. This time, they were only going to enter the Sunless Mountain to kill the 4 prospective chosen. In addition, the Sunless Mountain itself wasn't a good place, so it was useless to send so many people. This time, only Big Brother, Second Sister, and Senior Brother Qin Yu need to go, Xiaochen said as he looked at the crowd. Without wasting any time, after a few simple words, Xiaochen, Chenling, and the others set off for the Sunless Mountain. Of course, Long Yang and Feng Ju were also with them. However, the two of them were obviously just here to watch the show and had no intention of making a move. Of course, Xiaochen didn't want them to make a move either. The group headed straight for the Sunless Mountain. As the place of punishment of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect, the Sunless Mountain was naturally located in the depths of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. Moreover, there were many protective talisman arrays around the Sunless Mountain. At the same time, the entrance was guarded by experts of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. Along the way to the entrance of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect, Xiaochen and the others were stopped by a saint. Looking at them, the saint said coldly, "The Sunless Mountain is an important place. Leave immediately." The Sunless Mountain naturally didn't allow anyone to get close. After hearing the saint's words, Xiaochen didn't say much. He directly flashed the token that Yinyangzi had given him and said, we want to enter the Sunless Mountain. Seeing the token, the saint was stunned at first, then carefully confirmed its authenticity. After confirming that the token was indeed real, the saint didn't dare to ask any more questions and immediately let Xiao Chen and the others enter the Sunless Mountain. After successfully entering the Sunless Mountain and passing through the entrance, the group realized that the Sunless Mountain was indeed the place of punishment of the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. It could be described as completely dark. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1264. In Sunless Mountain, there was no sun, night, or day. The sky was gray all year round, and it was drizzling all the time. At the same time, this rain was not ordinary rain, it was full of corrosiveness. Although the corrosive nature of the rain wouldn't cause too much damage to cultivators and could be completely offset by the spiritual energy in their bodies, this was only temporary. Over the years, the rainwater would slowly seep into the body, causing severe pain in the bones. At the same time, under the corrosive rainwater, the ground in Sunless Mountain was also devoid of life. The ground was incomparably muddy, and the air was filled with a rotten smell. The stench drifted in the air with the wind and formed an extreme yin qi. This yin qi could constantly devour the spirit energy of warriors. Although the speed was not fast, it could even be said to be very slow, but over time, the spirit energy in the warrior's body would be devoured. As a result, it was naturally more difficult and firm to live in Sunless Mountain. The punishment of Sunless Mountain was like a soft knife. It couldn't kill you or even hurt you, but day after day, year after year, you'd find that your body was getting weaker day by day. At the same time, you'd have to bear a huge psychological pressure. As soon as Xiao Chen entered Sunless Mountain, he had already felt that his spirit energy began to be devoured very slowly. It must be the doing of the yin qi in Sunless Mountain. However, at this speed, it was impossible to completely devour his spirit energy without 10 days to half a month. And by then, Xiao Chen would have already left. This is Sunless Mountain. It is really as dark as the rumors say. Like Xiao Chen, everyone was also looking at the environment of Sunless Mountain. Long Yang said with a chuckle at this time. Hearing Wang Yang's words, Xiao Chen curled his lips. This guy really didn't know what to do. Xiao Chen didn't want to waste any more time talking to him. He turned to the others and said, "Let's go. Find those 4 guys, kill them, and leave." Hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone nodded in agreement. Indeed, the Sunless Mountain was a place that made people very uncomfortable. Find the 4 prospective holy sons and kill them. According to Xiao Chen's instructions, everyone began to search for traces of the 4 prospective holy sons in Sunless Mountain. The Sunless Mountain was not large, and those who were imprisoned there were all disciples of the Yin and Yang sects who had broken the sect's rules. Their cultivation had not been sealed, nor had their movements been restricted. At the very least, they could move freely within the Sunless Mountain. Because of this, Xiao Chen and the others were stopped by a dozen ragged disciples of the heavenly Yin and extreme Yang sect before long. Looking at Xiao Chen and the others, a hint of mockery flashed in the eyes of these disciples. The leader even sneered and said, "Oh, there's a newcomer. Come over and take off your clothes." Not knowing the identity of Xiao Chen and the others, these people only thought that Xiao Chen was also imprisoned in Sunless Mountain because he had broken the sect's rules. Seeing the brand new clothes on Xiao Chen and the others, the disciples' eyes lit up. In a place like Sunless Mountain, people's needs were greatly reduced. A clean set of clothes was enough to make these disciples go crazy. Therefore, when they saw Xiao Chen and the others, they were all ready to snatch them. However, these people were clearly looking for the wrong target. Hearing these words, Xiao Chen glanced at Qianling beside him. Qianling also understood and stepped forward, looking at the leader in front of him as he said, "Where are Wang Ju and the others?" Wang Ju was one of the 4 prospective holy sons. Hearing Qianling's words, the leader was stunned at first, but then he angrily cursed. "You're courting death. Senior brother Wang Ju's name is not something you can casually call. Cut the crap and take off your clothes, or else," the leader obviously knew Wang Ju, and from the looks of it, he was quite aggressive towards Wang Ju. In fact, this was normal. After all, Wang Ju was the prospective holy son of the heavenly yin-yang sect. When ordinary disciples faced him, it was certain that they would be respectful. Since they knew Wang Ju, it was easy to deal with them. Therefore, before the leader could finish speaking, Qianling directly chose to attack. They were just ordinary disciples of the heavenly yin-yang sect. These people were naturally not Qianling's match. Not long after, these more than 10 people were beaten to the ground one by Qianling. The leader was especially taken care of by Qianling, who beat him until he constantly begged. "Senior brother, spare me, spare me." This junior brother has eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. One person crushed a group of them. So, no matter how stupid the leader was, he knew that they had bitten off more than they could chew. However, in the face of this person's begging, Qianling completely ignored him. He stopped what he was doing and asked coldly, "Since you know Wang Ju, do you know where he is?" I know. Hearing this, the disciple nodded repeatedly. "And the other 3 people with Wang Ju?" "They're all together. They're all with senior brother Wang Ju." Wang Ju and the other 3 were imprisoned in the Sunless Mountain together, so they were naturally together. Hearing this, a smile finally appeared on Qianling's face, and then he said indifferently, "Take us there." With someone leading the way, things were naturally much easier. Not long after, under the guidance of the disciple, Xiaochen and the others arrived at the entrance of a cave. In the Sunless Mountain, there were not many caves like this. Firstly, the ground of the Sunless Mountain was very wet, and there were not many places to dig caves. Secondly, the Sunless Mountain was very hard, and it was extremely difficult to dig a cave. Therefore, a cave like this was often dug by many generations of disciples. Under normal circumstances, those who could live in such a cave were people of high status. After all, if they lived in a cave, they could at least avoid the endless rain. After bringing Xiaochen and the others out of the cave, the disciple respectfully said to Qianling, Senior brother Wang Ju and the others are inside." Hearing this, Qianling nodded slightly, and then he let go of the disciple. Seeing this, the disciple did not dare to stay any longer, and immediately ran away. However, after running for a distance, the disciple found a place to hide out of curiosity, and secretly watched the development of the situation. He knew that the disciple did not leave, but so what? At this time, without Xiaochen saying anything, Long Qing, who had the most impatient temper, already stood outside the cave and shouted, "Wang Ju, come out and die." The voice clearly transmitted into the cave, and soon, there was a reply from the cave, only to hear the same cold shout. "Which blind fool is courting death? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1265. It didn't take much effort to find Wang Ju's group of 4. At this moment, a cold shout came from within the cave. Immediately, 4 young men wearing the prospective holy sun robes of the heavenly Yin Sun sect strode out of the cave. The clothes on the 4 of them were decent, unlike the ragged clothes of the dozen or so disciples he saw earlier. It could be imagined that the 4 of them should be living a good life in Sunless Mountain. Facing the 4 people in front of him, Xiaochen already knew that they were Wang Ju's group. As expected, when Wang Ju's group saw Qianling, Long Qing, and Qinyu, a cold smile appeared on their faces. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes turn red. When he saw Qianling's group, the leader, Wang Ju, immediately revealed a cold smile. "Qianling, the 3 of you also entered Sunless Mountain?" Ha! He thought that Qianling's group had also been punished and imprisoned in Sunless Mountain. However, facing Wang Ju's cold smile, Qianling did not reply. Instead, Xiaochen said expressionlessly, "You're Wang Ju." Wang Ju had never seen Xiaochen before. When he heard Xiaochen's words, he frowned slightly and asked, "Who are you?" He did not know Xiaochen's identity. When he heard Wang Ju's words, Xiao Chen did not beat around the bush and said indifferently, "Xiao Chen." After speaking, without waiting for Wang Ju's reply, Xiao Chen immediately chose to attack. He pointed his finger and instantly used the fish intestine sword finger. In the face of Xiao Chen's sudden attack, Wang Ju did not care about what he was thinking. He immediately attacked with a palm strike and also used a saint-level martial skill. The martial civilization of the Central World was clearly higher than the North Star realm. Therefore, although there were very few saint-level martial skills in the North Star realm, there were not many in the Central World. Moreover, as the prospective holy son of the heavenly Yin Sun sect, it was not strange that Wang Ju had a saint-level martial skill. The two saint-level martial skills fiercely collided in the air. At this time, Wang Ju shouted angrily, "You're Xiao Chen." Wang Ju was definitely not unfamiliar with the name Xiao Chen because Bai Qiuran had mentioned Xiao Chen in front of him more than once. Although he had never met Xiao Chen, Wang Ju knew that the person who Bai Qiuran hated the most was Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen's name. Although he didn't know why Xiao Chen had appeared in the sunless mountain, Xiao had's ts. And now, Xiao Chen. T. Chen. This was definitely the best opportunity to show off in front of Bai Qiuran. Therefore, as soon as he finished speaking, Wang Ju's eyes flashed with intense killing intent. Keenly sensing Wang Ju's killing intent, Xiao Chen sneered inwardly. Wang Ju was about to die, but he still didn't know. He actually wanted to kill Wang Ju and then claim credit from Bai Qiuran. It was a good idea, but unfortunately, Wang Ju didn't have the chance. The two of them attacked. On the side, Chen Ling, Long Qing, and Chen Yu also attacked. As for Long Yang and Feng Ju, they stood to the side and didn't have the slightest intention of joining in. This time, they entered the sunless mountain to kill Wang Ju's group with Yin Yangzi's approval. Therefore, Xiao Chen's group didn't have the slightest hesitation when they attacked. In a head-on collision, the fish intestine sword finger and Wang Ju's palm print cancelled each other out and slowly dissipated. However, at the same time, Xiao Chen had already summoned the dustless sword and moved his feet to attack Wang Ju. Over the years, as Xiao Chen's strength improved, the dustless sword, which was formed from the heavenly sword embryo, naturally could not improve at all. Compared to when it was just formed, the dustless sword was many times stronger. As the sword slashed down, a terrifying sword intent wreaked havoc. The ground was cut open, and the sword rushed towards Wang Ju like lightning. Facing Xiao Chen's attack again, Wang Ju was a little surprised. He didn't expect Xiao Chen to be so strong. However, before he could think too much, Xiao Chen's sword had already arrived. Wang Ju immediately blocked it. The two of them fought fiercely. After a short few tens of moves, Xiao Chen already had a rough understanding of Wang Ju's strength. As expected of the heavenly yin-yang sect's quasi-saint, Wang Ju's strength was extremely formidable. In the Northern Star dimension, Wang Ju's strength was indeed sufficient to become a saint. Unfortunately, Wang Ju's strength was still slightly weaker when compared to Xiao Chen. Especially in terms of physical strength, he wasn't a match for Xiao Chen at all. After gaining a rough understanding of Wang Ju's strength, Xiao Chen was confident in his ability to kill Wang Ju. Even though Wang Ju's strength wasn't weak, Xiao Chen was still confident in his ability to kill Wang Ju. The fierce battle continued without end, and as he watched Xiao Chen and Wang Ju in battle, Feng Ju asked at this moment, "Do you think Xiao Chen can kill Wang Ju?" Feng Ju was obviously asking Long Yang. Long Yang grinned when he heard this, and he replied without the slightest worry. The two of them aren't on the same level at all. Even though Wang Ju's cultivation is at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, it isn't difficult for brother Xiao Chen to kill him. Long Yang's discerning ability was extremely experienced, and he'd instantly seen through their strengths. Xiao Chen didn't fear Wang Ju's attacks at all because he possessed the tempered battle body. The swift recovery ability of the tempered battle body allowed Xiao Chen to have the confidence to go head-on against Wang Ju. Xiao Chen didn't pay any attention to Wang Ju's attacks at all, and he didn't even have any intention of dodging Wang Ju's attacks. He fought with his life on the line. Xiaochen was ferocious while Wang Ju was extremely aggrieved. Xiaochen dared to go head-on against him and dared to exchange injuries with him, but Wang Ju didn't dare. Wang Ju could only choose to dodge when facing Xiaochen's attacks, but in this way, he'd naturally lost the initiative. He gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. At the same time, Wang Ju noticed to his surprise that the injuries he'd inflicted on Xiaochen had actually healed in a short period of time. Wang Ju's expression became unsightly when he faced Xiaochen's terrifying recovery ability, and he was extremely shocked in his heart. How could this be possible? Xiaochen paid no attention to Wang Ju's shock. At this moment, his attacks grew more and more ruthless, and as the battle continued, more and more people gathered in the surroundings. As many as dozens of disciples of the heavenly yin-yang sect who were imprisoned in the sunless mountain gathered. They looked at the two sides fighting fiercely with puzzled expressions. What was going on? They didn't know what was going on, and under everyone's gaze, about half an hour passed. Xiaochen was still in peak condition, and Wang Ju was already seriously injured. Wang Ju naturally couldn't be Xiaochen's opponent. Wang Ju's sword slashed down. Seeing that there was no way to dodge Xiaochen's sword, Wang Ju shouted in horror, "Xiaochen, you can't kill me. The disciples of the heavenly yin-yang sect are forbidden from killing each other. If you kill me, you won't be able to escape. Today, I'll make up for the 2 chapters 1-0. This is the first chapter. Please collect it. Please recommend it. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.